The moment May Carter's trembling hand touched the cold iron of the train door, she knew there was no turning back. Behind her lay a dead man and a lifetime of running. Ahead stood a stranger who'd paid for a wife through 3 lines in a newspaper. "Touch me and I'll leave," she'd warned in her only letter. But when Colt Merriman's storm-gray eyes met hers across that desolate Wyoming platform, she realized some promises were made to be broken. This is their story, a tale of survival, redemption, and the kind of love that's forged in fire and winter cold. Stay with me until the very end and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The train whistle screamed one final time before dying into the vast Wyoming silence, and May Carter stood alone on a platform that was little more than weathered planks and broken dreams. November wind cut through her threadbare coat like a vindictive knife, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and snow that hadn't yet fallen but promised to bury everything in its path. She clutched her battered leather case. Everything she owned in this world fit inside it, and tried not to think about the fact that she'd just traded one prison for another. The other passengers had scattered like tumbleweeds, swallowed up by waiting wagons and warm embraces. Families, friends, people who belonged somewhere. May belonged nowhere, and that was exactly how she'd survived the last 3 years. Don't get close. Don't let anyone in. Don't ever, ever let them touch you. "Mrs. Merriman?" The voice came from behind her, low and rough as gravel underfoot. May turned slowly, every muscle in her body coiled tight as a rattlesnake ready to strike. Running had taught her to always know where the exits were, to never show fear, to keep her spine straight even when everything inside her was screaming to flee. The man who'd spoken was tall, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He stood about 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the weak afternoon sun. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin, the kind of face that came from years of brutal winters and blistering summers. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. His jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and his hair, dark brown, almost black, was too long, curling slightly at his collar beneath a worn Stetson that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Gray, storm cloud gray, and completely, utterly empty. "I'm May Carter," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not Mrs. Merriman. Not yet, maybe not ever." Something flickered across those dead eyes. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance, hard to tell. "The advertisement said you were coming to be married." "The advertisement said I was coming to be a wife," May corrected, setting her case down and crossing her arms. The wind whipped her dark blonde hair across her face, and she shoved it back impatiently. "There's a difference. I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll work, but I have conditions." Colt Merriman, because this had to be him, the man whose brief, emotionless letter had offered her a way out, stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he picked up her case and started walking toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Hey!" May hurried after him, her worn boots slipping on the icy planks. "Did you hear what I said?" "Heard you." He tossed her case into the back of the wagon with a thud that made her wince. Everything she owned was in there, including the small pistol she'd taken off a dead man's body. "You coming or not? It's a 3-hour ride to the ranch, and we're burning daylight." May's hands clenched into fists. 3 years ago, before everything went to hell, she would have climbed into that wagon without question. 3 years ago, she'd been a different person, softer, more trusting, foolish enough to believe that marriage meant safety. She'd learned better. She'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous place a woman could be was in her own home, with a man who believed a wedding ring gave him ownership. "I need your word," she said, not moving. "I need you to understand my terms before we go anywhere." Colt turned back to her, and for the first time she saw real emotion cross his face. Impatience. "Lady, I don't know what kind of man you think I am, but I'm not in the habit of forcing myself on women. You answered my advertisement. I agreed to your terms. Now either get in the wagon, or I'll take you back to the station and you can catch the next train to wherever the hell you came from." "My terms were 2 sentences in a letter," May shot back. "I don't think you understand what I mean." "Then spell it out." She took a breath, cold air burning her lungs. Don't touch me. Ever. Not my hand, not my arm, not even by accident. I'll share your home. I'll earn my keep. But I won't share your bed, and I won't be treated like property. If you can't agree to that, I'm leaving right now." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless stamping of the horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Colt studied her with those unsettling gray eyes, and May forced herself not to look away. She'd learned to read men in the hardest way possible, learned to see the warning signs before fists started flying. This man was angry, but it was a cold anger, controlled, the kind that didn't explode into violence but froze everything it touched. "Fine," he said finally. "I've got no interest in a woman who doesn't want me. You'll have your own room. I'll stay out of your way. You stay out of mine. Fair enough?" It wasn't warmth. It wasn't welcome. But it was agreement, and right now, that was all May needed. "Fair enough," she echoed. Colt nodded once and held out his hand to help her into the wagon. May stared at his outstretched hand like it was a snake. "What did I just say?" He dropped his hand immediately. "Right. Forget it." She climbed into the wagon herself, settling onto the hard wooden seat. Colt swung up beside her, careful, she noticed, to leave a solid foot of space between them, and took up the reins. With a click of his tongue and a snap of leather, the horses started moving, and May Carter left behind the last piece of civilization she'd see for God only knew how long. The landscape rolled past in endless waves of brown and gold. Prairie grass bent low by constant wind, distant mountains purple against a gray sky, and absolutely nothing else. No towns, no houses, no people, just emptiness stretching in every direction until it swallowed the world whole. May had grown up in Missouri, where trees grew thick and towns grew close together. She'd spent the last 3 years running through cities, St. Louis, Denver, a dozen nameless stops in between, places where she could disappear into crowds and reinvent herself with every new boarding house. This was something else entirely. This was exposure. This was vulnerability. This was nowhere to hide if things went wrong. "How much farther?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched for over an hour. "Another 2 hours," Colt said without looking at her. "Maybe less if the weather holds." May glanced at the sky. It had the heavy, waiting quality of snow about to fall. "And if it doesn't hold? Then we'll be cold." Helpful, real helpful. May wrapped her coat tighter around herself and wished she'd thought to bring more blankets, or a better coat, or any of the 1,000 things a person needed to survive in a place like this. "There's a blanket behind the seat," Colt said, still not looking at her. "You can use it. I'm fine." "You're shivering." "I said I'm fine." This time he did look at her, one dark eyebrow raised. "Pride'll keep you warm, will it?" May's jaw tightened. She hated that he was right, hated even more that he'd noticed. With stiff movements, she reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket that smelled like horse and smoke. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and the warmth was immediate and blessed. "Thank you," she said quietly. Colt just grunted and turned his attention back to the horses. They rode in silence for another 20 minutes before May's curiosity got the better of her. "Why'd you place the advertisement?" "Needed a wife." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." May bit back a sharp reply. She had no right to pry into his life when she had no intention of sharing hers. Still, it seemed only fair to know something about the man whose home she'd be living in. "How long have you had the ranch?" 10 years. "Is it a big operation?" "Big enough." "Do you have help? Other ranch hands?" "Sometimes. Not right now." Getting information out of this man was like trying to squeeze water from a stone. May gave up and watched the landscape instead, noting the way the light changed as the sun dropped lower, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, in a harsh sort of way. Lonely, too. She understood lonely. The first snowflakes started falling just as the sun touched the horizon. Within minutes, the light flurry had turned into a steady snowfall, thick white flakes that clung to their clothes and melted on their faces. Colt urged the horses faster, and May held on to the edge of the seat as the wagon bounced over increasingly rough ground. "There," Colt said, pointing ahead. May squinted through the snow and made out a dark shape in the distance. As they drew closer, it resolved into a cabin, larger than she'd expected but still modest, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. A barn stood about 50 yards away, and she could just make out the shapes of a few outbuildings through the falling snow. "Home," Colt said flatly, and pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. Home. May tested the word in her mind and found it foreign. She hadn't had a home in 3 years, just places she stayed until it was time to run again. Colt climbed down and started unhitching the horses. May got down on her own. She wasn't about to ask for help she'd just forbidden him to give, and grabbed her case from the back of the wagon. Her fingers were numb with cold, and the case seemed heavier than it had at the station. "Cabin's open," Colt called over his shoulder. "Get inside and start a fire. I'll be in once I've dealt with the horses." May pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into darkness. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust, but when they did, she found herself in a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a black iron stove next to it. A rough wooden table and 2 chairs sat in the middle of the room. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. 2 doors led off the main room, bedrooms, presumably. The air inside was almost as cold as outside. May set down her case and went to the fireplace, where someone, Colt, probably, had already laid wood and kindling. Matches sat in a tin on the mantel. Within minutes, she had a small fire crackling, and the warm light pushed back some of the gloom. She was adding larger logs when Colt came in, stamping snow from his boots. He carried 2 buckets of water, which he set down near the stove without a word. Then he shrugged out of his heavy coat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Your room's on the left," he said, nodding toward one of the doors. "Mine's on the right. There's a well out back, but in winter we melt snow for most things. Outhouse is about 20 yards behind the cabin. You'll see the path. Supper's whatever you want to make it. I've got beans, bacon, some dried meat. Help yourself." May nodded slowly. "All right." They stood there awkwardly, 2 strangers who'd just agreed to share a life while remaining as separate as possible. May realized she should probably say something else, something to break the tension, but words failed her. "I'll see to my horse," Colt said finally. "Make yourself at home." He grabbed his coat and went back out into the snow, and May was alone again. She walked to the door on the left and pushed it open. The room beyond was small but not cramped, just big enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A single window looked out toward the mountains, though right now all she could see was swirling white. The bed had a thin mattress and 2 blankets that looked handmade. No pillow. It was the nicest room she'd had in 3 years. May set her case on the bed and opened it slowly. Everything she owned. 3 dresses, all worn and mended multiple times, 2 sets of undergarments, a spare pair of boots with holes in the soles, a small Bible her mother had given her, though May hadn't opened it since the night she'd killed her husband, and wrapped in a flannel shirt at the very bottom, the pistol. She took it out and checked it automatically, loaded, 5 rounds, ready to fire. She'd learned to shoot out of necessity, practicing in secret with bullets she'd stolen and a gun she'd sworn she'd never use. Then came the night James had come home drunk and mean, meaner than usual, and May had made a choice. The gun, or her life. She'd chosen life. May slid the pistol under the thin mattress, close to where her head would rest. Then she unpacked the rest of her belongings, hanging the dresses on pegs and placing the Bible on the dresser. It didn't take long. 3 years on the run didn't leave room for sentiment or excess. When she came back out to the main room, Colt had returned and was building up the fire. He'd taken off his hat, and his dark hair was damp with melted snow. "There's a kettle on the stove if you want coffee," he said without turning around. "Cups are on the shelf." May found the cups, chipped ceramic, mismatched, and poured coffee for both of them. She set Colt's on the table and wrapped her hands around her own, savoring the warmth. "Thank you," she said, "for the room. It's nice." Colt straightened and turned to look at her. In the firelight, his face looked less harsh, or maybe just tired. "It was my—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "It's yours now. Make it however you want it." He picked up his coffee and took a long drink, then set the cup down with more force than necessary. "I'm going to check the barn one more time. Bolt the door behind me." "Why?" The question came out sharper than May intended, edged with old fear. Colt paused at the door. Because it's winter in Wyoming, and you never know what might be prowling around. Wolves, mountain lions, sometimes worse. Bolt the door, May. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it in his rough voice made her chest tight. She nodded. All right. He pulled on his coat and hat and disappeared back into the storm. May crossed to the door and slid the heavy iron bolt into place. Then she stood there for a moment, listening to the wind howl and the fire crackle, feeling the weight of silence and isolation settle over her like a shroud. This was her life now, this cabin, this man, this endless, empty land. May turned back to the kitchen area and started looking through supplies. Colt had said to make supper, so she'd make supper. Keep busy. Don't think too hard about what you've done or where you are. Just survive. Just like always. She found beans, bacon, and flour. Dried onions hung from the ceiling. There was lard in a crock by the stove and salt in a wooden box. Basic, but enough. May set to work, and within an hour, she had beans simmering on the stove and flatbread cooking on a griddle. The cabin had warmed considerably by the time Colt came back in, his coat and hat white with snow. He bolted the door again and hung up his things, then stopped when he saw the food. Smells good, he said, surprise evident in his voice. It's just beans and bread, May said. Nothing fancy. It's more than I usually bother with. He walked to the washstand by the stove and poured water into the basin, then scrubbed his hands and face. When he turned back, droplets clung to his stubble and his hair stood up in wet spikes. For a moment, he looked almost human. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the scarred wooden table. May noticed that Colt ate quickly but not sloppily, the movements of someone used to working hard and needing fuel, not someone who took pleasure in meals. She picked at her own food, her stomach too knotted with tension to feel hungry. You're not eating, Colt observed. I'm eating enough. Suit yourself. He sopped up the last of his beans with a piece of flatbread and leaned back in his chair. That was good. Thank you. May nodded, surprised again by his politeness. She'd expected, what? Demands? Criticism? Instead, she'd gotten quiet competence and simple gratitude. I'll do the dishes, Colt said, standing and collecting their plates. That's my job, May protested. Not tonight. He carried the dishes to the wash basin and set them inside. You've been traveling all day. Get some rest. It was dismissal, clear and final. May stood, uncertain what to do with herself. Is there anything you need from me? Before bed. Colt turned to look at her, and something unreadable crossed his face. No, just... He paused, then seemed to change his mind about what he was going to say. Good night, May. Good night. May retreated to her small room and closed the door. She leaned against it for a moment, listening to the sounds of Colt moving around the main room, water sloshing, dishes clinking, the creak of floorboards. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind of sounds that should have been comforting but instead made her skin crawl with old fear. She changed quickly into her nightgown, thin cotton that wouldn't do much against the cold, and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy but not terrible, and the blankets, once she'd piled them both on top of herself, created a warm cocoon. Through the thin walls, she could hear Colt banking the fire, his footsteps moving to his own room, the creak of his bed as he lay down. Then silence, except for the wind and the settling of the cabin and the thunderous beating of her own heart. May slipped her hand under the mattress and touched the cold metal of the pistol. Still there. Still ready. Just in case. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories flooded back. Memories she'd spent 3 years trying to outrun. No. James Carter had been handsome and charming and everything a 19-year-old girl from a small Missouri town could want in a husband. He'd courted her properly, won over her parents, married her in the town church with half the county watching. For the first 3 months, he'd been perfect. Then he'd lost his job at the mill. Then he'd started drinking. Then the drinking had turned mean. May had tried everything, being quieter, being sweeter, being invisible. Nothing worked. James's anger was a living thing that fed on whatever was closest, and May was always closest. Black eyes, broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder. She'd covered the bruises and told lies and prayed for things to get better. They never got better. The night it happened, James had come home later than usual, drunker than usual. He'd been fired from yet another job, his fourth in a year, and he'd decided it was May's fault. She'd made him look weak. She'd embarrassed him. She'd ruined his life. She'd been in the kitchen when he'd grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. She'd tried to pull away, and he'd backhanded her so hard she'd seen stars. Then he'd grabbed her hair and dragged her toward the bedroom. And May had known in her bones, that if she let him take her in there, she wouldn't come out alive. The pistol had been in the kitchen drawer. James had kept it there, though he'd forbidden May to touch it. But when he'd loosened his grip for just a second to open the bedroom door, she'd torn free, lunged for the drawer, and grabbed the gun. "Put that down," James had snarled, turning toward her. "You don't have the guts." She'd pulled the trigger. The sound had been deafening in the small house. James had looked down at the red bloom spreading across his chest, then up at May, his face twisted with surprise and rage. He'd taken one step toward her, then another, and May had pulled the trigger again. He'd fallen then, and he hadn't gotten up. May had stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the gun heavy in her shaking hands, watching blood pool on the floor she'd scrubbed just that morning. Then survival instinct had kicked in. She'd grabbed what she could carry, taken the pistol, and run. She'd been running ever since. In the cold Wyoming night, May opened her eyes and stared at the dark ceiling. She'd told herself she'd never think about that night again, but being in this cabin with this strange man on the other side of the wall brought it all flooding back. The fear, the certainty that she'd traded one prison for another. "Don't touch me," she'd told Colt. "Don't ever touch me." Because if he did, if he proved to be like James, she'd have to run again. And she was so tired of running. May touched the pistol under her mattress one more time, then pulled her hand away. She'd given herself 3 rules when she'd climbed onto that train. Stay alert, stay separate, stay alive. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out how to survive this new life. Tonight, she'd just try to make it through till morning. Outside, the wind howled like something wild and lost, and snow fell steadily, covering the empty land in white silence. May woke to gray dawn light and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. Wyoming, the cabin, Colt. She sat up quickly, her breath pluming in the cold air. The fire in the main room must have died down overnight because the temperature had dropped considerably. She dressed as fast as her numb fingers would allow, layering on her warmest dress and wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. When she emerged from her room, she found Colt already dressed and moving around the kitchen. He'd rebuilt the fire, and warmth was slowly creeping back into the cabin. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's ready." "Morning," May's voice came out rough with sleep. She poured herself coffee and wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth. "How long have you been up?" "Couple hours. Had to check the stock, make sure they weathered the night all right." He turned to face her, and May noticed dark circles under his eyes. "Storms passed, but it left about 6 inches. You ever driven a wagon in snow?" "No." "Then you're learning today. We need supplies from town, and the next storm could hit any time. Best to go while we can." May's stomach clenched. Town meant people, and people meant questions, and questions meant lies. She'd gotten good at lying, but every new person was a risk. "Is there a marshal in town?" Colt's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Just wondering." "There's a sheriff, Ben Hollis. Good man. Mostly minds his business unless you give him reason not to." He paused, studying her face. "You planning on giving him reason?" "No," May said quickly. Too quickly. Colt crossed his arms. "May, I don't know what you're running from, and I don't need to know. But I've got a life here, and I won't have trouble brought to my door. You understand?" May lifted her chin. "I understand, and I'm not bringing trouble. I just want to be left alone." They stared at each other for a long moment, and May wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A woman with secrets? A woman scared of her own shadow? A woman who'd killed her husband and fled in the night? Fair enough, Colt said finally. Get some breakfast in you. We leave in an hour. The next hour passed in tense preparation. May made more flatbread and fried up bacon, which they ate quickly and without conversation. Then Colt went out to hitch up the wagon while May cleaned the dishes and banked the fire so it wouldn't go out completely while they were gone. The world outside had been transformed overnight. Everything was white, the ground, the buildings, the distant mountains. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the snow glittered like diamonds scattered across the earth. It was beautiful and brutal and utterly foreign to May's eyes. Colt brought the wagon around, and May climbed up without waiting for help she wouldn't accept. He'd loaded several empty crates into the back, presumably to fill with supplies. As they started off, May noticed he'd strapped on a gun belt she hadn't seen before, the holster riding low on his right hip. "Is that necessary?" she asked, nodding toward the gun. "In winter?" "Always. Never know what you might run into." He glanced at her. "You know how to shoot?" May hesitated. Admitting she could shoot meant admitting she'd had reason to learn. "A little." "A little doesn't keep you alive out here. When we get back, I'll teach you properly." "That's not necessary." "It is if you're going to survive a winter on the frontier," Colt interrupted. "I'm not always going to be there to protect you. You need to be able to protect yourself." The word protect made May's spine stiffen. "I don't need protecting." Colt gave her a sideways look. "Everyone needs protecting from something, May. Pride won't stop a wolf from tearing out your throat." May fell silent. He was right, damn him. Pride wouldn't stop a wolf. It also wouldn't stop a violent husband or a vengeful relative or any of the 100 other dangers that lurked in this world. But accepting help meant opening up, and opening up meant vulnerability, and May had sworn she'd never be vulnerable again. The ride to town took 90 minutes through snow-covered landscape that looked nothing like it had the day before. Colt navigated by landmarks May couldn't see. A distinctive rock formation here, a particular stand of trees there. She wondered what would happen if she had to make this journey alone and got turned around. How long would it take to freeze to death out here? The town, when they finally reached it, was barely worthy of the name. One main street lined with perhaps 20 buildings, a general store, a saloon, what looked like a church, a few houses, and various other structures May couldn't identify. A handful of people moved along the wooden sidewalks, bundled against the cold. Colt pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and set the brake. "I need to see the blacksmith about some tools. You get the supplies, there's a list in the crate. Tell Morton to put it on my account." "Wait." May started, but Colt was already climbing down. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just get what's on the list and wait in the wagon. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Then he was striding away down the street, his long coat swirling behind him, and May was alone. She took a deep breath and climbed down from the wagon. The wooden sidewalk creaked under her boots as she pushed open the door to the general store. A bell jangled overhead, and warmth rushed out to greet her, along with the mingled scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco. The store was larger than it had looked from outside, crammed floor to ceiling with goods, barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools hanging from the walls, a glass case displaying various smaller items, and behind the counter a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and suspicious eyes. "Help you?" he asked, his gaze traveling over May from head to toe in a way that made her skin crawl. "I need to pick up some supplies for Colt Merriman," May said, pulling the list from her pocket. "He said to put it on his account." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Colt Merriman. Well, well. Heard he'd sent for a mail-order bride, but I didn't quite believe it. Figured a man like that was better off alone." May's jaw tightened. "The supplies, Mr. Morton. Samuel Morton." He didn't move to take the list. "How long you been here?" "That's not your concern. The supplies, please. Now, don't get all prickly, just making conversation. Town like this, new people are a curiosity, especially when they're married to men like Colt Merriman." He finally took the list and squinted at it. "This'll take a few minutes to gather. You can wait over there." He gestured to a small stove in the corner where 2 chairs sat. May didn't want to wait. She wanted to grab the supplies and get out, but she also didn't want to make a scene. Small-town gossip spread like wildfire, and the last thing she needed was people talking about the strange, unfriendly woman Colt Merriman had married. She moved to the chairs and sat down, keeping her back to the wall so she could watch both the door and Morton as he moved around the store gathering items. Through the window, she could see people passing on the sidewalk, some of them glancing in curiously. "Shame about Colt's first wife," Morton said conversationally as he weighed out coffee beans. "Pretty little thing. Sarah, her name was, and the baby too. Terrible tragedy." May's blood ran cold. "What happened?" "Winter storm, same as the one we just had. Sarah went into labor early, and Colt couldn't get her to town. Baby came breech. Both of them died. That was, must be 5 years ago now. Colt hasn't been quite right since." Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. The empty eyes, the cold demeanor, the spare bedroom that had once been for someone else. Colt wasn't cruel. He was broken. "People said he shouldn't stay out there alone," Morton continued, clearly enjoying having an audience. "Said the isolation would drive him mad. But Colt's always been stubborn. Guess he finally admitted he needed help, though. That's why he sent for you, I expect. Someone to keep the house while he works the land." "Mr. Morton," May said quietly, "I'm just here for supplies, not conversation." Morton's lips pursed in displeasure, but he stopped talking. He finished gathering the items on the list: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, dried meat, and various other staples, and loaded them into a crate. "That'll be $8.30 on Colt's account." May nodded and helped carry the crate out to the wagon. As she was loading it into the back, she heard a woman's voice behind her. "John, you must be the new Mrs. Merriman." May turned to find a woman about her own age standing on the sidewalk. She was pretty in a soft way, with auburn hair and kind eyes. She wore a neat blue dress and a genuine smile. "I'm May," May said carefully. "Catherine Morrison. My husband runs the livery stable." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I know Samuel Morton can be a bit of a gossip. Don't let him bother you. Most folks around here are decent enough once you get to know them." It was the first genuinely friendly overture May had received since arriving in Wyoming, and she found herself softening slightly. "Thank you. If you ever need anything, a friend to talk to, or just want to get away from the ranch for a while, our place is the big white house at the end of Main Street. You're always welcome." Before May could respond, Colt appeared at the end of the street, his arms full of tools. He nodded curtly at Catherine. "Mrs. Morrison." "Mr. Merriman. I was just introducing myself to your wife." "Kind of you." Colt loaded the tools into the wagon and turned to May. "We should get going. Another storm's coming in tonight." May thanked Catherine and climbed into the wagon. As they pulled away from town, she caught glimpses of faces at windows, people watching them leave. The weight of all those curious eyes made her want to disappear. They were a mile out of town when Colt finally spoke. "Morton tell you about Sarah?" May glanced at him, surprised. "Yes. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles were white on the reins. "I should have told you before you got here. About why there's a spare room. About why I needed a wife. You don't owe me explanations." "Maybe not, but you should know." He stopped, jaw working. "I'm not looking to replace Sarah. I'm not looking for love or romance or any of that. I just needed someone to help run the place, and you needed somewhere to go. That's all this is." "I know," May said quietly. "That's all I want it to be." They didn't speak again for the rest of the journey home, but as the cabin came into view, small and solid against the vast landscape, May felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a place to hide anymore. This was a place where another broken person was trying to survive. Maybe, she thought, that was enough. The days that followed their trip to town settled into a rhythm as cold and predictable as the Wyoming winter itself. May woke before dawn to restart the fire that had died to embers overnight. She made coffee and breakfast while Colt tended the animals, their paths crossing in the cabin like two ghosts occupying the same space without ever truly meeting. They ate in silence, worked in silence, and retreated to their separate rooms each night with nothing more than a brief goodnight passing between them. May told herself this was exactly what she wanted. Distance meant safety. Silence meant no questions. But as the weeks crawled by and December's grip tightened around the land, she began to understand that isolation was its own kind of prison. The snow came in waves, each storm burying the world a little deeper. Some mornings, May would wake to find drifts piled against the cabin door, and Colt would have to dig them out before he could reach the barn. The animals needed constant care. The horses and the dozen cattle Colt kept had to be fed and watered twice daily, a brutal task in sub-zero temperatures. May helped when she could, hauling buckets of melted snow and carrying armfuls of hay, but the cold bit through her inadequate clothing with vicious teeth. "You need better boots," Colt said one morning after watching her struggle through knee-deep snow in her worn-out pair. His breath came out in white clouds, and frost clung to his stubble. "And a warmer coat. That thing you're wearing won't get you through January." "I'm fine," May said automatically, though her feet were so numb she could barely feel them. "You're not fine. You're freezing." He studied her for a moment, something that might have been concern flickering across his face. "Sarah's winter things are still in the trunk in my room. They'd fit you, I think. You should use them." The offer hung in the frozen air between them. May knew she should accept. Pride wouldn't keep frostbite at bay, but the thought of wearing a dead woman's clothes made her skin crawl. "I couldn't." "She's not using them," Colt said bluntly, "and you need them. I'll leave the trunk outside your door tonight." He walked away before May could argue further, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. May watched him disappear into the barn, then looked down at her own shaking hands. The cold had turned her fingers a mottled red-white, and she couldn't make them stop trembling. That night, true to his word, Colt left a battered trunk outside May's door. She dragged it inside and opened it slowly, half afraid of what she'd find. But there were only clothes. A heavy wool coat lined with fur, sturdy leather boots with thick soles, knitted gloves and scarves, and several warm dresses in practical fabrics. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, preserved carefully against time and moths. May ran her fingers over the coat's soft lining and felt an unexpected stab of grief for a woman she'd never met. Sarah Merriman had lived in this cabin, worn these clothes, loved the hard man on the other side of the wall. She'd died here too, along with her baby, in a storm not so different from the one that now howled outside. May put on the coat. It fit perfectly. The next morning, when she emerged bundled in Sarah's winter clothes, Colt's face went completely still. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and May saw naked pain flash across his features before he locked it away behind his usual mask. "Better," he said roughly, then turned and headed for the door. "Let's get to work." They didn't speak about it again. Christmas came and went without acknowledgement. May had almost forgotten the date until she woke on Christmas morning to find a small package wrapped in brown paper sitting on the kitchen table. Inside was a pair of leather work gloves, sized for smaller hands, and a pocket knife with a bone handle. No card, no explanation. But when Colt came in from the barn, his eyes flicked to the open package and then away. "Thank you," May said quietly. "I didn't get you anything." "Didn't expect you to." He poured himself coffee and stood by the fire, warming his hands. "It's just practical. You need gloves that'll last, and every woman should know how to handle a knife." May picked up the knife, testing its weight. The blade was sharp and well made, and something about the way it fit her palm felt right. "Will you teach me? How to use it properly?" Colt looked at her with surprise. "You want to learn? You said yourself I need to be able to protect myself. A knife's easier to hide than a gun." May met his eyes, and more reliable in close quarters. Something shifted in Colt's expression. A new kind of respect, maybe. Or just recognition that May was more than the frightened woman who'd stepped off the train 6 weeks ago. "After chores tomorrow, I'll teach you." That night, May lay in bed and thought about the knife now tucked under her mattress next to the pistol. 2 weapons. 2 ways to survive. She'd never wanted to be a woman who needed weapons to feel safe, but wanting and needing were different things entirely. James had taught her that lesson in the cruelest way possible. The teaching started the next afternoon. Colt cleared space in the barn where the wind wouldn't interfere and set up a crude target made of straw-stuffed sacks. He showed May how to hold the knife, how to strike, how to defend. "Don't slash," he instructed, guiding her arm through the motion without actually touching her. "Thrust. Put your weight behind it. You're small, so you need to use leverage and surprise." May practiced the movement over and over until her arm ached. Colt was a patient teacher, correcting her stance and grip with calm precision. He never came too close, never tried to adjust her position with his hands, always demonstrated on himself and let her mirror him. "Why are you doing this?" May asked during a break, her breath coming hard. "Teaching me to fight?" Colt was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've seen what happens to women who can't defend themselves. Because my mother couldn't, and my sister couldn't, and Sarah—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Because everyone should know how to protect what's theirs, including themselves." "What happened to your mother?" The question slipped out before May could stop it. "My father drank," Colt said flatly. "One night he drank too much and got mean. She tried to leave. He stopped her. I was 12. Too small to help. Too weak." His hands curled into fists. "I swore that day I'd never be weak again. And I'd never let another woman suffer because she didn't know how to fight back." May understood then. Colt's distance wasn't cruelty. It was control. He was terrified of becoming the thing he hated most, so he'd locked away every soft emotion and built walls high enough to keep everyone out, including himself. "I killed my husband," May heard herself say. The words came out stark and simple, and once they were loose, she couldn't take them back. "He beat me for 3 years. One night I shot him. Then I ran." Colt's gray eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than emptiness in them. "Good," he said. He deserved it. No shock, no judgment, just flat acceptance that sometimes violence was the only answer to violence. May felt something crack open in her chest, not quite trust, but the first fragile possibility of it. "Anyone looking for you?" Colt asked. "His cousin, James Hollister, Jeb, they call him. He swore he'd find me and make me pay." May's hand tightened on the knife. "That's why I keep moving, why I can't stay anywhere too long." "How long's he been looking?" 3 years? Colt nodded slowly. 3 years is a long time. Trail goes cold after that long. And you're a long way from Missouri now. Even if he's still looking, he won't find you here." May wanted desperately to believe him, but she'd learned that wanting didn't make things true. "You don't know Jeb. He's patient and mean. He'll keep looking until he finds me or dies trying." "Then let him come," Colt said with cold certainty. "He won't leave here alive." The promise in those words should have frightened May, but instead, she felt something else entirely. Relief, maybe. Or just the comfort of knowing she wasn't completely alone anymore. They went back to practicing, and May threw herself into learning with renewed determination. If Jeb Hollister ever did track her down, she'd be ready. She'd never be a victim again. January arrived with the worst cold May had ever experienced. Some mornings the temperature dropped so low that the water in the buckets inside the cabin would freeze solid overnight. Colt said it was common for winter here, but nothing in May's Missouri childhood had prepared her for cold that turned breath to ice crystals and made exposed skin burn. The isolation intensified. Days would pass without them seeing another soul, the world reduced to just the cabin and the barn and the endless white landscape. May had never been good with silence. It left too much room for memories to creep in, so she started talking during their meals, sharing small, safe things about her life before James. Colt mostly listened, offering little about himself, but May learned to read his silences. The slight softening around his eyes meant he was amused. The tightening of his jaw meant she'd touched on something painful. "Did you always want to ranch?" she asked one evening as they ate venison stew she'd made from meat Colt had hunted. "No. Wanted to be a soldier when I was young. Thought there was honor in fighting." He chewed thoughtfully. "My father's death taught me different. Taught me that violence is just violence, no matter what uniform you wear. So I came west instead. Figured I'd make something with my own hands, hurt no one but myself if I failed." "Did you fail?" "Not yet." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Though there have been close calls. Year the cattle got sick, year the well ran dry. Year Sarah died and I nearly drank myself to death after." It was the most he'd ever said about his first wife, and May treaded carefully. "How did you stop? The drinking?" "Ran out of whiskey and was too stubborn to go to town for more. By the time I was sober enough to ride, I'd realized drinking wouldn't bring them back. Nothing would. So I could either lie down and die or get up and keep living. He met May's eyes. I chose to live. Some days, I'm still not sure why. May understood that too. The weight of surviving when part of you wanted to quit. The guilt of drawing breath when others couldn't. I'm glad you did, she said quietly. Choose to live, I mean. Colt looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Yeah, he said finally. Me too. The blizzard hit on a Tuesday morning in late January, roaring out of the north with a fury that shook the cabin's walls. May woke to the sound of wind screaming like a living thing and found Colt already up, securing shutters and reinforcing doors. How long will it last? She asked, pulling Sarah's coat tight around herself. Could be hours. Could be days. He finished hammering a support beam across one window and turned to her. We've got enough firewood for 3 days, maybe 4 if we're careful. Food's not a problem. Water neither. We'll just melt snow. Main thing is keeping the fire going and not letting the cold get inside. The wind reached a crescendo, and somewhere outside something crashed. Colt swore and grabbed his coat. I need to check the barn. Animals will be terrified. I'll come with you, May said. No, too dangerous. You can't go alone. If something happens, May, I'm coming. She pulled on her boots and gloves, grabbed a scarf to wrap around her face. We can argue or we can go. Your choice. Colt looked like he wanted to argue, but another crash from outside decided it. Stay close to me. Hold on to my coat. If we get separated, you follow the rope I've strung between the buildings. Don't let go. Understand? May nodded, and they stepped out into hell. The wind hit like a physical blow, driving snow into her face with stinging force. The world had vanished. She couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything but white chaos and Colt's dark shape in front of her. She grabbed onto his coat with both hands and held on as he pushed forward into the storm. The rope he'd mentioned appeared out of the white, and Colt gripped it with one hand while pulling May forward with the other. She stumbled over hidden drifts, ice working its way past her scarf and down her collar, freezing her skin. Her lungs burned with each breath of Arctic air. Then, suddenly, they were in the barn, and Colt was slamming the door shut behind them. The wind's scream dulled to a muted roar. The horses whinnied nervously in their stalls, and the cattle lowed in distress. Jesus, May gasped, bent over and trying to catch her breath. Ice had formed on her eyelashes, and her face felt frozen solid. You all right? Colt's hands hovered near her shoulders, not quite touching, worry etched across his face. Fine. Just give me a minute. They spent the next hour calming the animals and making sure the barn was secure. Colt checked every board, every corner, looking for places where the wind might work its way through. May distributed hay and whispered soothing words to the frightened horses, rubbing their noses and feeling them gradually relax. We should get back, Colt said finally. This is only going to get worse. The return trip was even more brutal. The wind had shifted, coming at them from a new direction, and the rope was their only lifeline through the blinding white. Halfway to the cabin, May's foot caught on something buried in the snow, and she fell hard. Her hand slipped from Colt's coat. Panic seized her as the white closed in. She couldn't see him, couldn't see the cabin, couldn't see anything. The wind's roar drowned out her shout. She flailed for the rope and missed, terror rising in her throat. Then strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her up and pulling her close. Colt's face appeared through the snow, his eyes fierce. He was shouting something, but she couldn't hear over the storm. He wrapped one arm around her waist and half carried, half dragged her the rest of the way to the cabin. Inside, with the door barred behind them, May collapsed against the wall. She was shaking violently, and not just from cold. She'd almost died out there. Another few seconds and she would have been lost, frozen, gone. May. Colt crouched in front of her, his hands gripping her shoulders now, contact forgotten in the face of crisis. May, look at me. You're safe. You're inside. You're safe. She focused on his face, the concern there, the fear quickly being locked away. His hands were warm through her coat, solid and real. I'm sorry, she whispered. I fell. I couldn't. You're safe, he repeated. That's all that matters. But he didn't let go, and May didn't pull away. For a long moment they stayed like that, his hands on her shoulders, her eyes locked with his, the storm raging outside while something else entirely raged between them. Then Colt seemed to realize what he was doing. He dropped his hands like she'd burned him and stood abruptly. "Get out of those wet clothes. I'll build up the fire." May's room was freezing, and her fingers were too numb to work the buttons on her coat. She struggled with them for several minutes before giving up and returning to the main room, where Colt had coaxed the fire into a roaring blaze. "I can't." She held up her shaking hands. "I can't feel my fingers." Colt turned and assessed the situation with a single glance. "Frostbite?" "I don't know. Maybe?" He crossed to her, jaw tight. "I need to check, and I need to help you out of these wet clothes before you freeze. I know we had an agreement, but right now your life is more important. Understood?" May nodded, too cold and scared to argue. Colt's hands were gentle but efficient as he unbuttoned her coat and helped her out of it. He unwrapped her scarf, peeled off her gloves, examined her fingers with careful attention. "They're cold, but I don't see frostbite. Can you move them?" May tried and managed to flex her fingers slightly. "A little." "Good. That's good." He guided her to the chair closest to the fire and knelt to remove her boots. "Your feet?" "Numb." He got her boots off and checked her feet through her stockings, then nodded. "You'll be all right. Just need to warm up slowly. Too fast and it'll cause more damage." He stood and grabbed a blanket from the back of the couch, wrapping it around her shoulders. "I'll make tea." May watched him move around the kitchen, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he kept his distance now that the immediate crisis had passed. He'd touched her. He'd broken their agreement to save her life, and now he was waiting for her to leave, just like she'd promised. "Colt," she said quietly. He paused, his back to her. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For coming after me. For—" She swallowed hard. "For touching me when you needed to." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "I won't apologize for saving your life, May. Agreement or not." "I'm not asking you to apologize." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm saying thank you, and I'm saying I'm not leaving." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "You sure? I broke my word." "To keep me alive, that's different." May managed a small smile. "Besides, where would I go in this storm? I'd die before I made it 50 feet. "True enough." He brought her tea, and this time when his fingers brushed hers passing the cup, neither of them pulled away immediately. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of howling wind and suffocating snow, of huddling by the fire and rationing firewood. The cabin's temperature dropped until May could see her breath even right next to the flames. They dragged every blanket and quilt into the main room and slept in chairs by the hearth rather than risk freezing in their separate rooms. On the second night, May woke from a nightmare about James, his dead eyes staring up at her, his blood spreading across the floor. She gasped awake to find Colt already alert, his hand on the rifle he kept close. "Just a dream," she managed, pulling her blanket tighter. "Must have been a bad one. You were crying out." He set the rifle down but didn't go back to sleep. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm's relentless assault. Finally, May said, "Do you have nightmares? About Sarah?" "Sometimes. Usually about the birth, how she screamed and there was nothing I could do. How the baby was blue when it finally came, already gone." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were clenched tight around his blanket. "I dream I could have done something different, gotten her to town sooner, or known how to turn the baby, or—" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Dreams can't change what happened." "No," May agreed, "but sometimes I wish they could." On the third day, the wind finally died. The silence after days of constant noise was almost eerie. Colt ventured outside first, digging through drifts that had piled to the cabin's eaves in places. When he finally got the door open enough to squeeze through, May saw a world transformed. Everything was buried. The barn was a white mound with just the tip of its roof visible. The well had disappeared entirely. Snow stretched in smooth, unbroken waves as far as the eye could see, glittering under a hard blue sky. "Jesus," Colt breathed. "I've never seen it this deep." They spent the next 2 days digging out, first a path to the barn, then access to the well, then around the cabin itself. The work was backbreaking, made worse by the fact that more snow fell each night, undoing part of their progress. But the animals were safe, the cabin stood strong, and they were alive. May learned something important during those days. Survival forged bonds that safety never could. Every shovelful of snow cleared was a shared victory. Every meal cooked and eaten together by the fire was an affirmation of life. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wall between them began to crack. Colt started talking more. Small things at first. Stories about the ranch, about horses he'd known, about the time he'd tried to rope a wild stallion and ended up being dragged half a mile before managing to let go. May found herself laughing at his dry delivery, and then found herself sharing her own stories in return. Safe stories about her childhood and her mother's terrible singing and the year the creek near her house had frozen solid enough to skate on. They didn't talk about James or Sarah or the violence that had shaped them both, but they didn't need to. Understanding lived in the silences, in the careful way they moved around each other, in the respect they showed for boundaries that had been necessary, but were now perhaps beginning to feel less so. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures and the promise that winter wouldn't last forever. May woke one morning to find sunshine streaming through the windows, and Colt already up, coffee made, and a look on his face she'd never seen before. "What?" she asked, instantly wary. "It's your birthday," he said. May blinked. "How did you—" "You mentioned it once, January 28th. I'm a few days late, but—" He gestured to the table where he'd laid out their usual breakfast plus a small cake, clearly baked that morning while she slept. May stared at the cake, lopsided and probably terrible, but made with his own hands for her. "Colt, you didn't have to—" "I wanted to." He shifted awkwardly. "You've been here 2 months now. You work hard. You haven't complained once, even when you had every right to. You deserve something nice." May's throat went tight. No one had baked her a cake in years. Not since her mother died, long before James had come into her life and ruined everything. "Thank you," she whispered. They ate the cake for breakfast. It was terrible, dry, and too sweet, and May loved every crumb. That afternoon, while Colt was out checking on the cattle, May ventured into the barn looking for extra rope to hang laundry. She found it tucked on a high shelf, and as she pulled it down, something else came with it. A small wooden box that fell and spilled its contents across the floor. May knelt to gather them up and froze. Photographs. A dozen of them, some stiff and formal, others more candid. And in every one, a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile. Sarah. May knew she should put them back, that this was private, that she was intruding. But she couldn't stop looking. Sarah had been beautiful, not in a striking way, but in the way of someone who radiated kindness. In one photo, she stood next to Colt, and the man in that picture was so different from the one May knew that they might have been two different people. That Colt was smiling. That Colt looked young and unbroken and full of hope. "What are you doing?" May jumped, nearly dropping the photographs. Colt stood in the barn doorway, his face gone completely cold. "I'm sorry," May said quickly, gathering up the pictures. "They fell when I reached for the rope. I wasn't—" "Get out!" The words were quiet, but edged with such fury that May flinched. She shoved the photographs back into the box and set it on the shelf, then hurried past Colt without looking at him. She heard him stay in the barn long after she'd returned to the cabin, and when he finally came inside hours later, he wouldn't meet her eyes. They ate dinner in hostile silence. May tried to apologize twice, but Colt cut her off both times with a single word. "Don't." That night, lying in her freezing room, May heard it, a sound she'd never heard from Colt before. Crying. Harsh, broken sobs that came through the thin wall like the storm had come back to batter the cabin. She pressed her hand against the wall and fought the urge to go to him, knowing her comfort would be unwelcome. She'd glimpsed his grief, and that was a trespass he wouldn't easily forgive. The next morning, Colt was up before dawn and gone. Out to check traps, he'd left a note saying, "Might be gone all day." May read the note 3 times, understanding its real message. "Stay away from me." She spent the day cleaning obsessively, needing something to do with her hands and her guilt. By evening, the cabin gleamed and supper was ready, but Colt still hadn't returned. May tried not to worry. He knew this land. He'd be fine. But when full dark fell and he still wasn't back, worry turned to fear. She pulled on her coat and boots and went to stand in the doorway, staring out into the night. The temperature was dropping again. If he was hurt out there, if he'd fallen or gotten lost. She was reaching for a lantern when she heard it, the sound of a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her as Colt rode into the yard, but it evaporated the moment she saw his face. Even in the dim light, she could see he was pale, his lips tinged blue. Colt? She hurried down the steps as he slid off his horse, moving stiffly. What happened? Fell through ice, checking the creek. His voice was slurred, his movements uncoordinated. Got out, but wet, cold. Horror shot through May. She knew about hypothermia, had heard stories of men who'd frozen to death in weather warmer than this. How long ago? Hour. Maybe more. Lost track. Inside. Now. May grabbed his arm and tried to pull him toward the cabin, but he was too heavy, and his legs weren't working properly. Colt, you have to move. You have to get inside where it's warm. He took a few stumbling steps, then his knees buckled. May caught him as best she could, but they both went down into the snow. Panic clawed at her throat. He was too big for her to carry, and if she left him here to get help, he'd die. Colt, please, she begged, shaking his shoulder. You have to help me. You have to stand up, please. His eyes opened, unfocused but aware. Can't. You can. You're going to, because I am not letting you die in this godforsaken snow. May got herself under his arm and heaved with all her strength. Up, now! Somehow, through sheer stubborn will, she got him to his feet. They staggered toward the cabin together, Colt leaning most of his weight on her, May's legs shaking with effort. Every few steps, he'd start to collapse, and she'd have to prop him back up, gasping encouragement and threats in equal measure. They made it through the door, and May kicked it shut behind them. The fire had burned low, but it was still going. She guided Colt to the chair closest to the hearth and went to work. His clothes were frozen stiff in places, ice coating the fabric. May's hands shook as she started stripping them off. Coat first, then shirt, fighting with buttons that wouldn't cooperate. Stay with me, she told him as his eyes started to drift closed. Don't you dare fall asleep, Colt Merriman. Do you hear me? Stay awake. She got his shirt off and gasped. His skin was deathly pale, his lips almost blue. She could see him shivering violently, his body trying desperately to warm itself. She knew from her mother's teaching that warming had to be gradual, but she also knew he needed heat now. May ran to her room and grabbed every blanket she had, then did the same with his. She threw more wood on the fire until it roared, then wrapped Colt in layers of wool and quilts. But he was still shivering, still barely conscious, and May knew what she had to do. She'd promised, she'd sworn, touch me and I'll leave. But if she left him like this, he'd die. May pulled off her own outer layers until she was down to her shift and climbed into the cocoon of blankets with Colt. He made a weak sound of protest, but she ignored it, pressing her body against his frozen one, sharing her warmth. His skin was like ice against hers, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him as close as she dared. I've got you, she whispered, her lips close to his ear. You're going to be all right. I've got you. For hours she held him like that, feeling his body gradually warm, his shivering slowly subside. She talked to him constantly, nonsense mostly, stories and memories and anything to keep him anchored to consciousness. She told him about her mother's garden and how the roses grew wild every summer. She told him about the first time she'd seen snow and how magical it had seemed. She even told him about James, about the good parts before everything went bad, because Colt needed to hear her voice, and she'd run out of safe things to say. Sometime near dawn, Colt's eyes opened, truly opened, focused and aware. He looked at May, at the way she was pressed against him, and understanding slowly dawned on his face. You stayed, he said hoarsely. Of course I stayed, May's voice cracked. Did you think I'd let you freeze to death? But you said, I know what I said. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot against her cold cheeks. And I meant it. But that was before I knew you, before you taught me to fight and made me a birthday cake and showed me that not every man is a monster. So yes, I stayed. And I'd do it again. Do you understand? I would do it again. Colt's hand came up slowly, trembling with exhaustion, and touched her face. Just touched it, his calloused fingers gentle against her tear-stained cheek. I understand, he whispered. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together in blankets by the dying fire, two broken people who'd found something in each other they'd thought was lost forever. When May woke hours later to gray morning light, Colt was still sleeping, his breathing deep and even, his color back to normal. She watched him for a long moment, this man who'd given her safety and asked for nothing in return, and felt her carefully constructed walls crumble to dust. She was in trouble, deep, dangerous trouble, because somewhere between the train platform and this frozen morning, she'd started to care. The morning after was awkward in ways May hadn't anticipated. She woke first, still tangled in blankets with Colt, and carefully extracted herself without waking him. Her body ached from hours of lying in one position, and her face burned with the memory of how she'd held him, how she'd pressed herself against him without hesitation or fear. The old May, the one who'd stepped off that train 3 months ago, would have been horrified. This May just felt confused. She built up the fire and started coffee, her movements mechanical while her mind churned. Everything had changed last night. The careful distance they'd maintained, the unspoken agreement that kept them separate, all of it had shattered the moment she'd climbed into those blankets with him. And the worst part was that she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Colt stirred as the smell of coffee filled the cabin. He sat up slowly, wincing, then looked around until his eyes found May. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the room, and May braced herself for anger or awkwardness or demand she couldn't meet. Thank you, he said finally, his voice still rough from the cold. For saving my life. May's throat went tight. You did the same for me during the storm. I figured we're even. May, coffee's ready. She turned away before he could say whatever he was going to say, before the weight of his gratitude could crush her. And you should eat something. Your body needs fuel after what it went through. She heard him stand, heard his footsteps cross the floor, and then he was there beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. May poured coffee with shaking hands. You were dying. I did what I had to do. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. His hand covered hers on the coffee pot, and May froze. You touched me, May. You held me all night. That matters. I broke my own rule to save your life, May said, pulling her hand away. Don't make it into something it wasn't. And what was it? Survival. The word came out louder than she'd intended, edged with desperation. It was just survival. That's all we're doing here, Colt. Surviving. Together, but separate. That's the agreement. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, Maybe I don't want to be separate anymore. May's heart stuttered. She forced herself to turn and face him, to meet those storm-gray eyes that were looking at her with something that terrified her more than James's fists ever had. Tenderness. Don't. Don't what? Don't do this. Don't make it complicated. May wrapped her arms around herself. I can't. I'm not ready for... I know. Colt's voice was gentle. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just saying that something's changed between us, and pretending it hasn't won't make it go away. He was right, and May hated that he was right. Something had changed. She'd felt it the moment his hand had touched her face, the moment she'd realized she trusted him enough to fall asleep in his arms. But trust was dangerous. Trust led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. I need time, she said finally, to think, to figure out what this means. Take all the time you need. Colt stepped back, giving her space. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you, if you don't want to. That last part was a question, and May answered it the only way she could. I don't want to. Relief flickered across his face, there and gone. Good, then we'll figure it out. Together. The days that followed were strange. Not quite the same as before, but not entirely different either. They still worked side by side, still ate meals in companionable silence, still retreated to their separate rooms at night. But now there were small touches that hadn't been there before. Colt's hand on her shoulder when he passed behind her. May's fingers brushing his when she handed him his coffee. Nothing dramatic, nothing demanding, just a quiet acknowledgement that the walls between them had cracks in them now. And maybe that was okay. March arrived with the first real thaw. The snow began to melt in earnest, turning the world into a muddy mess, but also revealing the land beneath, brown earth waiting for spring, the promise that winter wouldn't last forever. May felt something in herself thaw too, some frozen part she'd locked away 3 years ago. She caught herself smiling more, laughing at Colt's dry observations about the chickens he'd bought from a neighbor, looking forward to meals together instead of dreading them. And one evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, she realized she was happy. Actually, genuinely happy, for the first time since before she'd married James. The realization terrified her. "You all right?" Colt asked, noticing her sudden tension. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Chinoweki?" "I'm fine." But her voice shook and Colt set down the harness he'd been mending. "May, what's wrong?" "Nothing. She stood abruptly. "I need some air." She grabbed her coat and went outside, gulping in the cold evening air like she'd been drowning. Her hands were shaking and her chest felt too tight. This was wrong. She shouldn't be happy here. She shouldn't be letting her guard down. Happiness was what had gotten her hurt before. What had made her trust James. What had nearly gotten her killed. The cabin door opened behind her and Colt's footsteps crunched through the remaining snow. "Talk to me." "I can't do this." The words tumbled out before May could stop them. "I can't be happy here. It's not safe." "What's not safe? Being happy?" "Yes!" May spun to face him. "Don't you understand? Every time I let myself care about something, it gets taken away. My mother died. My marriage turned into a nightmare. I won't let myself care about this place, or this life, or—" She stopped, but the unspoken word hung between them anyway. "You." Colt was quiet for a moment, his face shadowed in the twilight. Then he said, "I understand. After Sarah died, I swore I'd never let myself care about anything again. It hurt too much. So I locked it all away and told myself I was better off alone." "And were you?" "No." His voice was raw with honesty. "I was miserable. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. There's a difference, May. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me everything." Colt took a step closer. "You taught me that walls don't keep you safe. They just keep you alone. You taught me that surviving isn't enough if you're not actually living. And you taught me that maybe, just maybe, it's worth the risk to care again." May's eyes burned with unshed tears. "What if it goes wrong? What if I lose this like I've lost everything else? What if you don't?" Colt's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. "What if this is the thing that finally goes right?" May leaned into his touch before she could stop herself, and something inside her cracked wide open. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I know, me too." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. Wouldn't you?" May nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then, slowly, carefully, she reached up and covered his hand with hers. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a choice to stop running, to stop hiding, to let someone in. Colt's breath caught. "May, don't," she said softly. "Don't say anything. Can we just stand here for a minute, like this?" "As long as you want." They stood in the gathering dark, Colt's hand warm against her face, May's hand covering his, while the spring wind whispered around them and the first stars appeared overhead. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a declaration, but it was something, a beginning, maybe, or at least the possibility of one. Finally, when the cold became too much to ignore, they went back inside. May made tea while Colt finished mending the harness, and they sat together in comfortable silence until it was time for bed. At her door, May paused and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding, for being patient." "Always," Colt replied, and the promise in that single word warmed her more than the fire ever could. Spring came in earnest over the next few weeks. The snow disappeared except in the deepest shadows. Green shoots pushed up through the mud. The creek, frozen solid for months, began to flow again with a musical burble that made May's heart lift. And with the changing season came a change in her relationship with Colt. It happened gradually, in increments so small she almost didn't notice. The way he'd ask her opinion about which field to plant first. The way she'd automatically pour his coffee the way he liked it. The casual touches that became more frequent. A hand on the small of her back as he passed. Her fingers lingering on his arm when she handed him something. They were learning each other's rhythms, fitting their lives together in a way that felt natural instead of forced. May started a garden in a plot behind the cabin, digging in the thawed earth with tools Colt had made for her. She planted vegetables and herbs, and Colt surprised her one morning with a small rose bush he'd traded for in town. "You said your mother grew roses," he explained, setting the bush down carefully. "Thought you might want to try." May looked at the thorny plant with its promise of future blooms and felt emotion swell in her chest. "Thank you. I'll take care of it." "I know you will." He paused, then added quietly, "You take care of everything here, including me." It was true, May realized. Without quite meaning to, she'd stopped thinking of this place as temporary shelter and started thinking of it as home. She'd learned which floorboards creaked, which chickens were the best layers, how Colt took his coffee, and what his different silences meant. She'd built a life here, small and quiet, but hers. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Colt said, "I need to go to town tomorrow. Sell some cattle, pick up seed for planting. Want to come?" May hesitated. She hadn't been back to town since that first trip, preferring the safety of isolation. But spring fever was stirring in her blood, and the thought of seeing other people didn't fill her with quite as much dread as it once had. "All right." Colt looked at her with surprise. "Yeah?" "Yeah." May managed a smile. "Besides, I want to pick up fabric for new curtains. The ones we have are older than sin." The next morning they set out early, the wagon rolling smoothly over roads that were finally clear of snow. May felt lighter somehow, younger, like she'd shed a skin that had been suffocating her. The landscape was beautiful in the soft spring light, green grass pushing up everywhere, wildflowers beginning to bloom, the mountains in the distance still snow-capped but less forbidding. "It's pretty," she said, surprised by her own observation. She'd been so focused on surviving that she'd forgotten to notice beauty. "It is," Colt agreed, but he was looking at her, not the landscape. Town was busier than it had been in winter. People moved with purpose, glad to be outside after months of confinement. Colt pulled up to the general store and helped May down, not because she needed help, but because it had become natural for him to offer and for her to accept. "I'll be at the cattle yard," he said. "Should take a couple hours. Meet back here?" May nodded and watched him drive away, then turned toward the store. She was reaching for the door when she heard a familiar voice. "May, how lovely to see you again." Catherine Morrison hurried across the street, her face bright with genuine pleasure. May felt herself relax slightly. Catherine had been kind during their first meeting, and kindness was something May had learned not to take for granted. "Hello, Mrs. Morrison. Please, call me Catherine. And you must come have tea with me after you're done shopping. I insist. I've been dying to have a proper conversation with you, and heaven knows we women need to stick together out here." Before May could think of a polite refusal, Catherine had linked their arms and was steering her toward the general store. "Samuel Morton's in a mood today. His gout's acting up, so don't let him scare you. Just be firm and he'll behave." Morton was indeed in a foul mood, but Catherine's presence seemed to mollify him somewhat. May purchased her fabric and a few other supplies, while Catherine chatted easily about town gossip. Who was courting whom, whose barn had burned down, whose cow had given birth to twins. It was all perfectly mundane and oddly comforting. "Now," Catherine said once they'd left the store, "tea at my house. No arguments." May found herself following Catherine to the large white house at the end of Main Street. Inside it was warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread. Catherine's husband was out working, and her 2 young children were with her mother for the day, so they had the place to themselves. Over tea and cake, Catherine studied May with intelligent eyes. "How are you really doing out there? I know Colt's place is isolated, and winter can be hard on people who aren't used to it." "I'm managing," May said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Catherine poured more tea. "Look, I know it's not my business, But I also know what it's like to be a stranger here, trying to figure out where you fit. When I first married Thomas and moved out here, I thought I'd die of loneliness. It took time, but I found my place. You will too. May felt her defenses crumble slightly. How did you know you belonged? The day I realized I was thinking of it as home instead of Thomas's town, or that place we live. Catherine smiled. Has that happened for you yet? Maybe, May admitted. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden or cooking dinner or just being there. And Colt? How is he treating you? The question was casual, but May heard the real concern underneath. Catherine was asking if May was safe, if she was happy, if she needed help. It was the kind of question one woman asked another when she understood what dangers women faced behind closed doors. He's good to me, May said quietly. Better than I deserve, probably. He's patient and kind, and he's never once... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Never once what? Never once made me feel afraid. The admission felt huge, important. I didn't think that was possible. With a man, I mean. But Colt makes me feel safe. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed May's hand. Then hold on to that. Safe is worth more than gold out here. Safe means you can build a life instead of just surviving one. They talked for another hour, and by the time May left to meet Colt, she felt like she'd made her first real friend in Wyoming. It was a good feeling, warm and unexpected, and it stayed with her as she walked back to the general store. Colt was already waiting, the wagon loaded with seed bags and supplies. He smiled when he saw her. Have a good time? Actually, yes. May climbed up beside him. Catherine Morrison invited me to tea. She's nice. I like her. Good. You should have friends. Colt clicked to the horses, and they started the journey home. Did she gossip about me? A little. She wanted to make sure you were treating me well. And what did you tell her? May looked at him, this man who'd given her sanctuary and asked for nothing, who'd been patient with her fears and gentle with her boundaries. I told her the truth, that you're good to me. Colt's hand found hers on the seat between them, and May didn't pull away. They were halfway home when they saw the rider. He was stopped in the middle of the road ahead, his horse standing still as a statue. Even from a distance, May could see he was watching them, waiting for them. Her stomach dropped. Who is that? Colt's voice had gone cold and flat. I don't know. But May's hand had moved instinctively to the knife Colt had given her, now always tucked in her boot. Something about the way the man sat his horse, the slouch of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, made her skin crawl. As they drew closer, the man kicked his horse forward to meet them. He was in his 30s, May guessed, with a hard face and cold eyes. A rifle rested across his saddle, and he had the look of someone who knew how to use it. You folks heading to the Merryman place? He asked, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. Who's asking? Colt's hand had moved to his own rifle, casually but deliberately. Name's Jeb Hollister. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm looking for someone. A woman. About 5'4", blonde hair, pretty in a plain sort of way. Goes by the name May Carter. You seen anyone like that? May's blood turned to ice. No. Not here, not now. Not when she'd finally found something worth staying for. Colt's expression didn't change, but May felt the tension coil through his body. Can't say I have. You a lawman? Bounty hunter. Jeb's eyes swept over May, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. The woman I'm looking for killed her husband 3 years back in Missouri. Shot him in cold blood while he slept. That's a lie, May said before she could stop herself. He wasn't sleeping. He was trying to kill me. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Colt's jaw clenched, but he didn't look at her. Jeb's smile widened. Well, saved me some trouble, didn't you? He shifted in his saddle, his hand moving closer to his rifle. May Carter, you're coming with me. There's a price on your head, and I aim to collect it. She's not going anywhere with you. Colt's voice was deadly calm. This is my land, and she's my wife. You want her, you go through me. That can be arranged. Jeb's hand closed on his rifle. Everything happened fast. Colt's hand shot to his own rifle, bringing it up as Jeb did the same. May screamed and threw herself sideways, hearing the crack of gunfire, feeling something hot graze her arm. The horses screamed and bolted, and May was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her. She hit hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Above her she heard more gunfire, shouting, the thunder of hooves. She rolled and came up in a crouch, her knife in her hand, looking for Colt. He was standing in the middle of the road, his rifle aimed at Jeb, who sat his horse 20 feet away with his own rifle trained on Colt. Both men were breathing hard, both clearly unhurt. A standoff. "You shoot me! You're a murderer!" Jeb called. "I'm legally pursuing a fugitive." "You shot at me first," Colt replied. "I'd call that self-defense. A jury might see it different." "There is no jury out here." Colt's voice was hard as stone. "There's just you, me, and about 50 miles of empty land. Who do you think would find your body before the wolves did?" Jeb's eyes narrowed. "You'd hang for killing me." "Maybe, but you'd still be dead." Colt took a step forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn your horse around and ride away. And you're going to forget you ever saw May Carter. Because if you don't, if you ever come near my wife again, I will hunt you down and put a bullet in you. That's not a threat. It's a promise." For a long moment, Jeb didn't move. May could see him calculating, weighing his options, the bounty versus his life. Finally, he lowered his rifle. "This isn't over," he said. "I know where you live now. I'll be back with the law, and then you won't be able to protect her." "Come back," Colt invited. "I'll be waiting." Jeb spurred his horse and galloped away, disappearing over the rise. Only when he was gone did Colt lower his rifle and turn to May. "Are you hurt?" May looked down at her arm where blood was seeping through her sleeve. "Just grazed me." Colt was beside her in 3 strides, gently pushing her sleeve up to examine the wound. "It's not deep. We'll clean it when we get home." He looked into her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me there was a bounty on you?" "I didn't know. James's family must have posted it after I ran." May's voice shook. "Colt, I'm sorry. I've brought this to your door. I should leave." "No." The word was absolute. "You're not leaving. You're not running anymore." "You heard him. He'll come back with the law. Let him." Colt's hands gripped her shoulders. "We'll deal with it. Together, you understand? Whatever comes, we face it together." May wanted to believe him, wanted to think that they could survive what was coming, but she'd been running for 3 years for a reason. The law didn't care that James had beaten her. The law didn't care that she'd killed him to save her own life. The law only cared that a woman had killed her husband, and that was a hanging offense. "I killed him, Colt," she whispered. "I shot him twice while he was coming at me, and then I ran. They'll hang me for it." "Not if I can help it." Colt pulled her close, and May let herself lean into him, let herself take comfort in his solid strength. "I won't let that happen. I swear to you, May, I won't let anyone hurt you. Not Hollister, not the law, not anyone." May closed her eyes and wished with everything in her that he could keep that promise. But she'd learned the hard way that some things were beyond even the strongest man's control. They gathered up the horses and the scattered supplies, then continued home in tense silence. May's arm throbbed, and her mind raced with possibilities, all of them bad. Jeb would go to the sheriff. The sheriff would come with a warrant. They'd take her back to Missouri to stand trial, and she'd hang, unless she ran. The thought whispered through her mind like a snake. She could leave tonight while Colt slept, take a horse and disappear into the mountains. She'd done it before. She could do it again. It would hurt him, but better a broken heart than a dead wife on his conscience. As if reading her thoughts, Colt said quietly, "Don't even think about it." "Think about what?" "Running. I can see it on your face." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and turned to look at her. "If you run, you'll be running forever. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never having a home, never having peace?" "Better than hanging." "You won't hang." Colt's voice was fierce. "I'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this. There's got to be someone who'll listen to the truth about what James did to you." "And what if there isn't?" May's voice broke. "What if the truth doesn't matter? What if all they see is a woman who killed her husband?" "Then we run." Colt took her hand. But we run together. You understand? If it comes to that, we leave together. I'm not letting you face this alone. May stared at him, this man who was willing to throw away everything, his home, his land, his entire life, to protect her. Why? Why would you do that for me? Colt's thumb brushed over her knuckles, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because somewhere between that train platform and today, you became more than just the woman I hired to help run this place. You became the reason I wake up in the morning. You became home. He paused, swallowed hard. You became everything, May, and I'll be damned if I lose you without a fight. May's vision blurred with tears. Colt? You don't have to say anything. I know you're not ready. I know you're scared, but I needed you to know. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, and the tenderness of the gesture broke something in May's chest. Come on. Let's get inside and take care of that arm. Inside the cabin, Colt cleaned and bandaged May's wound with gentle efficiency. The bullet had barely grazed her, leaving a shallow furrow that would heal quickly. But May couldn't stop shaking, not from pain, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. Drink this. Colt pressed a cup of whiskey into her hands. It'll help with the shock. May drank, the liquor burning down her throat and spreading warmth through her chest. She watched Colt move around the cabin, securing windows and loading his rifle with methodical care. He was preparing for war, and she was the cause. I'm sorry, she said again, for all of this, for bringing danger to your door. Colt set down the rifle and came to kneel in front of her chair. Stop apologizing. You did what you had to do to survive. That's nothing to be sorry for. But your ranch, your life, means nothing without you in it. He took her hands. May, I was dead before you got here. I was breathing and moving, but I wasn't alive. You changed that. You made me remember what it felt like to care about something other than just getting through the day. So whatever happens, whatever we have to face, it was worth it. You're worth it. May couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she did something she hadn't thought herself capable of anymore. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against Colt's, letting him hold her, letting herself be held. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, while outside the spring wind whispered promises of storms to come. That night, May couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Colt moving restlessly in his own room. Every sound made her jump. Was that hoofbeats? Was that voices? Was the law already coming? Around midnight, unable to stand it anymore, she got up and padded barefoot into the main room. Colt was there, sitting in a chair by the window with his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Can't sleep either? He asked without turning. No. May moved to stand beside him, looking out at the dark landscape. Do you think he'll come back tonight? Not tonight. He'll wait until he has the law on his side. Colt finally looked at her. But he will come back. Soon. May wrapped her arms around herself. What do we do? Tomorrow, I ride to town and talk to Ben Hollis. He's a fair man. Maybe he'll listen. And I'll send a wire to a lawyer I know in Denver. If it comes to a trial, you'll need proper representation. And if none of that works? Colt stood and faced her, his eyes serious. Then we have two choices. You can face the law and trust that the truth will be enough. Or we run. Leave everything behind and start over somewhere they'll never find us. Canada, maybe. Or Mexico. May thought about the garden she'd planted, now just beginning to sprout. The roses that would bloom in a few weeks. The life she'd started to build in this small cabin on the edge of nowhere. I don't want to run anymore. Then we fight. Colt's hand came up to cup her face. And whatever happens, we do it together. May turned her head and pressed a kiss to his palm, a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a promise, a choice. Together, she agreed. They stood there in the dark, and May felt something settle in her chest. Fear was still there, and uncertainty, and the knowledge that their peace was about to be shattered. But underneath all of that was something new, something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the thing that would finally go right. And even if it wasn't, even if everything fell apart and they lost it all, At least she wouldn't be facing it alone. At least she'd have Colt. And for now, that was enough. Dawn came gray and cold, bringing with it a sense of inevitability that settled over the cabin like fog. May watched the sun struggle to break through the clouds while Colt saddled his horse, preparing for the ride to town. Neither of them had slept more than an hour or two, and exhaustion carved lines in Colt's face that made him look older than his years. "I don't like leaving you here alone," he said for the third time, checking his rifle and tucking extra ammunition into his saddlebag. "What if Hollister comes back? Then I'll shoot him." May's voice was steadier than she felt. The pistol from under her mattress was now tucked into her waistband, hidden beneath Sarah's old shawl. "I'm not helpless, Colt. You made sure of that." He turned to look at her, and something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. "If anything happens, if anyone shows up, you fire 3 shots. I'll hear them and come running. The town's 10 miles away. I'll still hear them." He crossed to her and took her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "Promise me, May. 3 shots if there's trouble." "I promise." May covered his hands with hers. "But nothing's going to happen. Jeb won't come back without the law behind him. You said so yourself." "I know what I said, but I also know desperate men do stupid things." Colt's forehead came to rest against hers, and they stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air. "I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I've finally found something worth living for." May's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she felt the same way, wanted to give voice to the feelings that had been growing in her chest like wildflowers after rain. But the words stuck, tangled up with old fear and new vulnerability. Instead, she said simply, "Come back safe. Always." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, brief and chaste but loaded with meaning, then stepped back. "Bar the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me." "And May?" "Yes?" "If this goes bad, if they come for you and I'm not back yet, run. Take the bay mare, she's the fastest. Head north into the mountains and don't stop until you hit the Canadian border. You understand?" May nodded, though the thought of running without him made her stomach twist. She watched from the doorway as Colt mounted his horse and rode away, his broad shoulders tense with worry. He looked back once, raising a hand in farewell, and then the distance swallowed him whole. The silence that followed was oppressive. May barred the door as instructed, then moved through the cabin with restless energy. She couldn't just sit and wait. She'd go mad. So she threw herself into work, the way she always had when fear threatened to overwhelm her. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, reorganized the pantry, checked and rechecked her weapons, the pistol, the knife, even the heavy iron skillet that could serve as a club if necessary. She was measuring flour for bread when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast. May's heart slammed against her ribs. She ran to the window and peered through a crack in the shutters. 5 riders were approaching the cabin, and even from a distance she could see the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. Behind him rode Jeb Hollister, his face split with a triumphant grin. They'd come. Despite Colt's visit to town, despite whatever arguments he might have made, they'd come for her anyway. May's mind raced through her options. She could run. The back door led to the barn, and the bay mare was saddled as Colt always kept her. But if she ran now, she'd be branded a fugitive forever. There'd be no trial, no chance to tell her side of the story. Just a lifetime of looking over her shoulder, or she could face them, stand her ground, and trust that truth would be enough, even though every instinct screamed that truth had never been enough for women like her. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin. A voice called out, "May Carter, this is Sheriff Ben Hollis. I've got a warrant for your arrest. Open up and come out peaceful, and nobody needs to get hurt." May's hand closed around the pistol at her waist. She thought about Colt's promise, "We face it together," and felt her resolve harden. She wouldn't run. Not this time. Not when running meant abandoning the first real home she'd had in years. She unbarred the door and stepped out onto the porch, her hands visible but not raised. The sheriff was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a tired expression. The other 3 riders were deputies, she guessed, all young and nervous-looking. And Jeb sat his horse with barely contained glee, clearly savoring his victory. "I'm May Carter," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "But I'm also May Merriman. Legal wife of Colt Merriman, who I believe spoke with you this morning, Sheriff. Hollis had the grace to look uncomfortable. He did. And I explained to him that a marriage don't erase a warrant. You're wanted in Missouri for murder, Mrs. Merriman. I've got no choice but to take you in. It wasn't murder. May kept her voice level, though her pulse hammered in her ears. It was self-defense. My husband was beating me to death. I shot him to save my own life. That's not how the warrant reads, Jeb interjected, his voice oily with satisfaction. Says here you shot James Carter while he was unarmed and defenseless. Says you're a cold-blooded killer who fled justice. You're a liar. May's hand twitched toward her pistol, but she forced herself to keep still. James was drunk and violent, and he'd been beating me for 3 years. Ask anyone in town back home, they all knew. They all saw the bruises. But nobody helped me because he was a man and I was just his wife. That's real sad, Jeb said mockingly, but it don't change the facts. You killed him, and now you're going to hang for it. Nobody's hanging today, Sheriff Hollis said firmly. He dismounted and approached the porch slowly, his hands away from his gun. Mrs. Merriman, I understand your position, and I heard what your husband had to say this morning, but I've still got to take you in. If what you're saying is true, you'll have a chance to prove it at trial. A trial in Missouri, where James's family has money and influence and I have nothing. May laughed bitterly. You know how that trial will end, Sheriff. We both do. Hollis's expression tightened. Maybe so, but that's not for me to decide. I'm just here to enforce the law. Even when the law is unjust? Especially then, because the alternative is chaos. He took another step forward. Please, Mrs. Merriman, don't make this harder than it has to be. Come peaceful, and I give you my word I'll make sure you're treated fair on the way back. May's mind whirled. She could draw her pistol. She was fast. Colt had made sure of that. But 5 against 1 were terrible odds. And even if she won, she'd be a murderer for real. Or she could surrender, trust the system, and pray for a miracle. She was reaching for the pistol when another sound cut through the tension. More hoofbeats, these coming from the direction of town. Everyone turned to see Colt thundering up the road, his horse lathered with sweat, a second rider beside him. The second rider was a woman, May realized with shock. She was perhaps 60, dressed in severe black, and she sat her horse with the ramrod posture of someone used to being obeyed. When they pulled up, Colt was off his mount in an instant, positioning himself between May and the sheriff. You're not taking her, he said flatly. Mr. Merriman, we've been through this, Hollis started. I know what we discussed. That was before I found Judge Harriet Chambers. Colt gestured to the woman, who was dismounting with surprising agility. Judge Chambers presides over the Territorial Circuit Court, and she's agreed to hold an emergency hearing right here, right now, to review the circumstances of the warrant. Jeb's face flushed with anger. That's not legal. She's got to stand trial in Missouri. Actually, Judge Chambers said in a voice like cracking ice, territorial law gives me authority to review warrants issued in other states before allowing extradition, especially in cases involving possible self-defense claims. Her sharp eyes swept over the assembled men, then landed on May. Mrs. Merriman, I presume. May nodded, not trusting her voice. I've read the warrant. I've also read the affidavit your husband provided this morning, detailing the abuse you suffered. Chambers pulled a leather portfolio from her saddlebag. I've taken the liberty of wiring Missouri and requesting medical records and witness statements. They should arrive within the week. A week? Jeb exploded. You can't just let her walk free for a week. I can, and I will. Chambers fixed him with a look that could have frozen fire. Unless you'd prefer I dismiss the warrant outright based on insufficient evidence? Hollis stepped in smoothly. Judge Chambers, with respect, I've got a valid warrant and a duty to execute it. And you will execute it, Sheriff, by remanding Mrs. Merriman into house arrest pending my review. Chambers produced a document and signed it with a flourish. She's not to leave the Merriman property. Mr. Merriman will be responsible for ensuring her compliance. You'll post a deputy here if you feel it necessary, though I suspect that's an unnecessary expense for the county. The sheriff looked between May, Colt, and the judge, clearly doing calculations. Finally, he sighed. No deputy. But Mr. Merriman, if your wife runs, I'll have you up on charges too. Understand? She's not running, Colt said, his hand finding May's. We're done running. Jeb's face had gone purple with rage. This is bullshit. You're all in on it, protecting a murderer because she's pretty and helpless looking. Well, I've got news for you. When this sham of a hearing is over and she's convicted, I'm still collecting my bounty. And I'm going to watch her hang. Get off my land, Colt said quietly, but there was murder in his eyes. Now. Or what? You'll shoot me like your wife shot her husband? Jeb sneered. I'm not afraid of you, Merriman. Then you're a fool. Colt's hand moved to his rifle. Last warning, leave. For a moment, May thought Jeb would push it, would force the confrontation into violence. But Hollis intervened, grabbing Jeb's bridle. That's enough. You've done your part, Hollister. The law's got her now. Time to move on. This isn't over, Jeb spat, but he let himself be led away. The sheriff and his deputies mounted up. Before leaving, Hollis tipped his hat to Judge Chambers. I'll be back in a week for your ruling, Your Honor. See that you are, Sheriff. Chambers watched them ride away, then turned to May and Colt. Well, that was unpleasant. Might I trouble you for some coffee? It's been a long morning, and we have much to discuss. Inside the cabin, May's hand shook so badly she could barely pour the coffee. Reaction was setting in. The fear she'd been holding at bay flooding through her system now that the immediate danger had passed. Colt took the pot from her gently and finished the task himself, while Judge Chambers settled into a chair with the air of someone settling in for a lengthy stay. First things first, Chambers said once they were all seated. Mrs. Merriman, I need to hear your account of events. Everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how painful or embarrassing. I can't help you if I don't know the full truth. May looked at Colt, who nodded encouragingly. Then, haltingly at first but with growing strength, she told her story. She told them about meeting James, about the courtship that had seemed so perfect, about the wedding and the first 3 blissful months, then about the drinking, the job losses, the first time he'd hit her. She described 3 years of escalating violence in detail that made Colt's jaw clench and his hands curl into fists. The broken ribs, the black eyes she'd hidden with powder and lies, the dislocated shoulder, the time he'd held her head underwater in the wash basin until she'd nearly drowned, the constant fear, the walking on eggshells, the slow erosion of everything she'd been. And then she told them about the last night, about James coming home drunk and furious, about him dragging her toward the bedroom by her hair, about the certainty in her bones that if she let him take her in there, she wouldn't come out alive. I grabbed the pistol from the kitchen drawer, she said, her voice hollow, with remembered terror. He turned around and saw me with it. He laughed, said I didn't have the guts. Then he started walking toward me, and I knew that if he got his hands on me, he'd take the gun away and kill me with it. So I pulled the trigger. How many times did you fire? Chambers asked quietly. Twice. The first shot hit him in the chest. He looked surprised. Then he kept coming, so I shot him again. He fell then. He died right there on the kitchen floor. May's eyes were dry now, burned out from years of crying. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just watching him to make sure he was really dead. Then I took what I could carry and ran. I've been running ever since. Chambers was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, Did anyone in town know about the abuse? Everyone knew. The doctor who set my ribs, the women who saw my bruises at church, the minister who counseled me to be a better wife so James wouldn't get so angry. May's voice was bitter. They all knew. But nobody did anything because James was a man and I was his property. Will any of them testify to that? I don't know, maybe the doctor if he's still alive. But the rest... May shook her head. James's family has money. The Carters basically own that town. Nobody's going to speak against them. Chambers tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. Your husband mentioned in his affidavit that you still bear scars from the abuse. Is that true? Heat flooded May's face. Yes. I'll need to document them, for evidence. Chambers softened slightly at May's expression. I know it's invasive and humiliating, but if we're going to fight this, I need irrefutable proof that you were in imminent danger. May looked at Colt, who'd gone very still. All right, she said quietly. What followed was one of the most humiliating experiences of May's life. In her small bedroom, with only Chambers present, May undressed while the judge took careful notes. She documented every scar, the puckered mark on May's ribs where they'd been broken and healed poorly, the burn on her shoulder from where James had put out a cigar, the faint line across her throat where he'd nearly strangled her with a belt, the countless small scars and marks that mapped 3 years of systematic violence. Chambers' face remained professionally neutral throughout, but May saw something flicker in her eyes. Anger, maybe. Or recognition. When May was dressed again, Chambers said quietly, "I was married to a violent man once, 20 years ago, before I became a judge. I understand what you went through, Mrs. Merriman, and I promise you, I will not let you hang for saving your own life." The words, spoken with such conviction, made May's eyes burn with tears she'd thought she had no more of. "Thank you," she whispered. They returned to the main room where Colt stood at the window, his posture rigid with tension. He turned as they entered, his eyes searching May's face. "I'm all right," she said, answering his unspoken question. Chambers gathered her papers with brisk efficiency. "I'm heading back to town now to draft my ruling and send more wires. With the evidence I've gathered today, I'm confident I can have the warrant dismissed or at least ensure any trial takes place here in Wyoming, where you'll have a fair chance. But Mrs. Merriman, you need to understand, this isn't over. Even if I dismiss the warrant, James's family can pursue civil action. They can make your life very difficult." "Let them try," Colt said grimly. "They'll have to go through me first." Chambers smiled slightly. "I believe they would. You've got a good man here, Mrs. Merriman. Don't let him go." She headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Hollister? He's trouble. Watch your back where he's concerned. Bounty hunters don't like losing their prey." After she left, May and Colt stood in the sudden silence, neither quite knowing what to say. Finally, May managed, "How did you find her? Judge Chambers?" "Rode to her house in town after the sheriff refused to listen. Told her everything. About James, about what he did to you, about the warrant. She read your letter." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The letter May had written to Colt before leaving Missouri, the one that had explained just enough to warn him without condemning herself. "I kept it, in case I ever needed proof that you'd been honest with me from the start." May took the letter, her handwriting shaky across the page. She'd written it in a boarding house in Denver, terrified and desperate, and certain no man would want a wife with her history. But Colt had read it and chosen her anyway. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why did you fight so hard for me? You could have let them take me, started over with someone else, someone without all this mess." Colt crossed the room and took her face in his hands, his eyes fierce. "Because I love you, May. I have for weeks now, maybe months. I tried not to. Tried to keep it just business, just practical. But somewhere between the blizzard and the fever and all those quiet mornings drinking coffee together, you became the most important thing in my life. More important than this ranch. More important than anything." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "So no, I couldn't let them take you. I couldn't lose you without fighting with everything I have." May's breath caught. "Colt, I know you're not ready to hear it. I know you're still scared, still healing. I'm not asking you to say it back." His forehead came to rest against hers. "I'm just asking you to believe it, to trust that I mean it." "I do believe you." May's hands came up to cover his where they cupped her face. "And I'm not scared anymore. Not of this, not of you." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I love you too, Colt Merriman. I think I have since you made me that terrible birthday cake. Maybe even before." The smile that broke across Colt's face was like sunrise after endless night, bright and warm and full of hope. "Terrible cake?" "Awful," May confirmed, smiling through her tears. "Worst thing I've ever eaten. And you loved it anyway." "And I loved it anyway." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, tentative at first, then deeper as he responded, his arms coming around her to pull her close. It was May's first real kiss since James, and nothing like those brutal claiming kisses had been. This was gentle and sweet and full of promise. This was a question and an answer all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers again. "I want to marry you," he said. "For real this time, not just on paper." When this is over, when you're free, I want to stand up in front of the whole town and pledge my life to yours." "We're already married," May pointed out, but she was smiling. "On paper, because you needed somewhere to go and I needed help running the ranch. That's not good enough anymore." His hands tightened on her waist. "I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you're the bravest, strongest person I've ever met. Because when I look at you, I see home." May's heart felt too big for her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "When this is over, yes. I'll marry you again, and this time it'll be because I want to, not because I'm running from something, because I'm running toward you." They kissed again, longer this time, until the need for air forced them apart. Then Colt pulled May to the couch and settled her against his side, his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time in 3 years, May felt completely, utterly safe. "What happens now?" she asked after a while. "Now we wait." Colt's fingers traced idle patterns on her arm. "Judge Chambers will do what she can. We'll hope the evidence is enough. And if it's not—" He paused. "If it's not, we run. Together, like I promised." "I don't want to run anymore." "Then we'll hope it doesn't come to that." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But May, you need to prepare yourself. Even if the warrant gets dismissed, even if we win this fight, Jeb Hollister isn't going to let this go. He's got it in his head that you owe him something. Men like that don't stop until they're stopped." May thought about the cold hatred in Jeb's eyes, the triumph that had twisted his face when he thought he had her. "He wants revenge for James." "Probably, or maybe he just wants the money. Either way, he's dangerous." Colt's voice went hard. "I won't let him hurt you. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. I don't want you to have to kill for me. I'll do what needs doing." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "May, I've killed before, during the war, and once after when a man tried to steal my cattle and shot at me first. I don't take life lightly. But I will not hesitate to protect what's mine. And you're mine now, whether there's a warrant or not. Understand?" The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, but instead, May felt only warmth. This wasn't James's cruel ownership. This was Colt claiming her as his to cherish and protect, just as she was claiming him. "I understand, and you're mine too, so we protect each other." Deal. He sealed it with another kiss, and May lost herself in it, in him, in the promise of a future that had seemed impossible just hours ago. The week that followed was strange, part honeymoon, part siege. They were confined to the ranch, unable to go to town or even ride far from the cabin. But within those boundaries, they built something new, something real. They talked for hours, sharing stories they'd kept locked away. Colt told her about the war, about the friends he'd lost, and the things he'd seen that still haunted his dreams. May told him about her mother's death, about the loneliness that had made James's attention feel like salvation instead of the trap it was. They worked side by side in the garden, planting and weeding while discussing futures that might or might not come to pass. They cooked together, Colt learning that May liked her coffee with sugar, and May discovering that Colt had a surprisingly good singing voice he only used when he thought she wasn't listening. And at night, they sat by the fire, May curled against Colt's side while he read to her from the few books he owned. Sometimes they'd talk until the fire died to embers. Other times they'd simply exist together in comfortable silence, finding comfort in proximity. On the 5th night, as they prepared for bed, May paused at the door to her room. She looked at Colt, then at his door, then back again. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said quietly. Colt's eyes darkened with something that wasn't quite desire, but something deeper. "May, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." She crossed to him and took his hand. "I'm not ready for everything, but I'm ready to not be alone. To sleep next to someone I trust. Is that all right?" "More than all right." He squeezed her hand gently. "Come on." His room was larger than hers, with a bigger bed and a window that looked east toward the sunrise. They climbed into bed together, fully clothed, and Colt pulled May against him until her back was pressed to his chest, and his arm was draped over her waist. "Is this okay?" he murmured against her hair. May laced her fingers through his and pulled his arm tighter around her. "Perfect," she whispered. She fell asleep like that, wrapped in warmth and safety, and for the first time in 3 years she didn't dream of blood or violence or James's dead eyes staring up at her. She dreamed of spring gardens and birthday cakes and a future that might actually be worth living. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and Colt's steady breathing in her ear. For a moment she lay still, marveling at the peace she felt. Then she carefully extracted herself and went to start breakfast. She was frying eggs when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast. Colt was at her side in an instant, rifle in hand. He moved to the window and looked out. Then his face went hard as stone. "It's Hollister, and he's brought friends." May grabbed her pistol and joined him at the window. Jeb sat his horse in the yard, flanked by two rough-looking men who had the unmistakable air of hired guns. All three were armed, and all three looked ready for violence. "Merriman!" Jeb's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Send her out, and we'll make this quick. Keep her hidden, and things get messy." Colt's jaw clenched. "Go to the cellar," he told May. "There's a tunnel that leads to the barn. If shooting starts, you run. You take the bay mare, and you ride for town as fast as that horse will carry you. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just go. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. May." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "If something happens to me, you need to survive. You need to tell people what happened here. Promise me." Before May could answer, one of the hired guns fired a shot that shattered the window. Glass exploded inward, and Colt shoved May to the floor, covering her with his body as more shots followed. "Last chance, Merriman," Jeb shouted. "Send her out, or we burn you out." Colt's eyes met May's, and in them she saw calculation, determination, and something else. A terrible resolve. "Stay down," he ordered, then rose and fired through the broken window. The world exploded into violence and noise, and May's week of peace shattered like the glass around her. The gunfire was deafening in the small cabin, each shot like thunder that shook May's bones. She crouched behind the overturned table Colt had kicked over for cover, her pistol gripped so tight her knuckles had gone white. Through the shattered window, she could see Jeb and his men taking positions behind whatever cover they could find. The water trough, the corner of the barn, a stack of firewood. They were spreading out, trying to surround the cabin. Colt fired methodically, not wasting ammunition, each shot calculated and precise. One of the hired guns yelped and stumbled back, clutching his leg. Not dead, but out of the fight. "Two left," Colt muttered, reloading with practiced efficiency. "May, you need to get to the cellar. Now!" "I'm not leaving you." May's voice was steel. She'd spent 3 years running, 3 years being helpless, 3 years letting fear dictate her choices. Not anymore. "We fight together or we die together. Your choice." Colt's eyes flashed with anger and something else. Pride, maybe? Or just recognition that arguing would waste time they didn't have. "Fine. But stay low and don't take risks. You hear me?" May nodded and moved to the other window, the one that faced the barn. She could see movement there. The second hired gun, trying to work his way around for a better angle. She aimed carefully, the way Colt had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil jarred her arms, and her shot went wide, splintering wood a foot from the man's head, but it was close enough to send him diving for cover, buying them precious seconds. "Good," Colt said. "Keep them pinned. I'm going to—" The world exploded. The back door blew inward in a shower of splinters and flame, and suddenly Jeb Hollister was there, his face twisted with rage, a pistol in each hand. Time seemed to slow. May saw Colt turning, bringing his rifle around, saw Jeb's pistols rising, saw the inevitability of what was about to happen. She didn't think. She just moved. May threw herself between them, her own pistol coming up, and fired. The shot took Jeb in the shoulder, spinning him around. His return fire went wild, punching holes in the ceiling. Colt's rifle barked once, twice, and Jeb went down, blood blooming across his chest. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the gunfire had been. May stood frozen, her pistol still aimed at the doorway, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Jeb lay on the floor, gasping, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "May!" Colt's hands were on her shoulders, turning her away from the sight. "May, look at me. Are you hit? Did he hit you?" She shook her head mutely. She couldn't seem to make words work. She'd shot someone. Again. The pistol in her hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Drop your weapons!" A new voice, loud and commanding, cut through her shock. Sheriff Hollis appeared in the doorway, his rifle trained on them. Behind him, May could see his deputies rounding up the remaining hired guns. "Everyone, weapons down, now!" Colt carefully set his rifle on the floor. "Sheriff, they attacked us. We were defending ourselves." "I can see that." Hollis moved into the cabin, his eyes taking in the damage, the blood, Jeb's wheezing form on the floor. "Deputy, get the doc. This one's still breathing." He turned to Colt and May. "What the hell happened here?" "Hollister came back," Colt said flatly. "Brought hired guns. Demanded we hand May over. When we refused, they opened fire. We defended our home." "That true?" Hollis looked at May, who still hadn't lowered her pistol. "Mrs. Merriman?" "Yes." Her voice came out as a croak. She lowered the pistol slowly, her arms shaking with delayed reaction. "He said he'd burn us out if we didn't surrender. We had no choice." Hollis's face was grim. "Hollister, you goddamned fool. What did you think you were doing?" Jeb coughed, blood flecking his lips. "She's a murderer, just taking what's mine." "You tried to kill 2 people over a bounty." Hollis's voice was disgusted. "That makes you the criminal here, not her." He turned to his deputies. "Get these men to town. Lock them up on charges of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and destruction of property. And somebody find Judge Chambers. She's going to want to hear about this." The next hour was chaos. The doctor arrived and tended to Jeb and the wounded hired gun, both of whom would survive to stand trial. Deputies took statements and collected evidence. Neighbors started arriving, drawn by the gunfire, and their faces ranged from shocked to sympathetic to curious. Through it all, May sat on what remained of her front porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching everything with a detachment that felt almost like floating. Colt stayed beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, solid and real in a world that had gone sideways. Catherine Morrison appeared at some point, her face white with worry. "May, oh my God, are you all right? We heard shots and came as fast as we could." "I'm fine." May's voice sounded far away even to her own ears. "We're both fine." "The cabin's a mess, though," Colt said, looking at the shattered windows, the splintered door, the bullet holes that pocked the walls like smallpox scars. "Going to take weeks to repair all this." "You'll stay with us," Catherine said firmly. "Both of you, until the cabin's fixed. I won't hear any arguments." Judge Chambers arrived just as the sun reached its zenith, her face thunderous. She surveyed the damage, spoke briefly with Sheriff Hollis, then marched over to where May and Colt sat. "Well," she said, "this certainly complicates things, though perhaps not in the way you'd expect." She pulled out her leather portfolio. "I received word this morning from Missouri. The doctor you mentioned, the one who treated your injuries, has agreed to testify on your behalf. So have 3 other women from your church who witnessed James's abuse. Apparently, once they heard someone was finally standing up to the Carter family, they found their courage." May's breath caught. "They're willing to testify?" "They are. Which, combined with the medical evidence I documented and the fact that James Hollister just tried to murder you in broad daylight, gives me more than enough grounds to dismiss the warrant entirely." Chambers' stern face softened slightly. "You're free, Mrs. Merriman. As of right now, all charges are dropped. Missouri no longer has any claim on you." The words didn't seem real. May stared at the judge, waiting for the catch, for the other shoe to drop. "Free?" "Free," Chambers confirmed. "The warrant is void. The bounty is void. And once I'm through with Jeb Hollister, he'll be spending the next 10 years in prison thinking about the consequences of attempted murder." She paused. "You did good work here today, Mrs. Merriman. Many women in your position would have folded. You fought back instead. That takes courage." May looked at Colt, at the man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd fought for her without hesitation. "I had help," she said quietly. "The best kind," Chambers agreed. She tipped her head toward Catherine. "Mrs. Morrison has offered you her hospitality while repairs are made to your home. I suggest you accept. You've both been through enough for one day." They gathered what they could salvage from the cabin: clothes, valuables, the few things that had survived the gunfight intact. May paused in the doorway of what had been their bedroom, looking at the rumpled bed they'd shared just that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. "We'll rebuild," Colt said, coming up behind her. "Better than before, stronger." "Is that a metaphor?" May asked, managing a weak smile. "Maybe." He pulled her close, and May leaned into his warmth, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. "But it's also literal. We need better shutters, thicker doors, maybe actual glass in the windows instead of oiled paper." Practical as always. "Someone has to be." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let's go before Catherine comes looking for us." The Morrison house was warm and welcoming, filled with the chaos of two young children and the smell of fresh bread. Catherine settled them in the guest room and refused to let them help with anything, insisting they rest and recover. That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange room, May finally let herself process everything that had happened. She'd killed James to save her own life. She'd shot Jeb to save Colt's. And she'd do both again without hesitation if faced with the same choices. "You're thinking too loud," Colt murmured beside her. "I can hear your thoughts from here." "I shot him," May whispered. "I shot Jeb, and I don't even feel guilty about it. What does that make me?" "Human." Colt rolled to face her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "May, you defended your home and your life. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's survival." "I keep thinking about what Judge Chambers said, that I fought back instead of folding, but I didn't feel brave. I just felt necessary, like there was no other choice." "That's what courage is," Colt said. "Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. You've been courageous since the day you stepped off that train. You just didn't realize it." May turned to face him, barely able to make out his features in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "You still want to marry me? Even after all this? Even knowing what I'm capable of?" "Especially knowing what you're capable of." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "May, you're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have broken most people. You rebuilt yourself from nothing, and today, when it mattered most, you stood your ground and fought. That's the woman I want to spend my life with. That's the woman I already pledged myself to." "I love you," May said, the words coming easier now, natural as breathing. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes, because I keep waiting for it to be taken away." "It won't be. I won't be." Colt pulled her closer until they were pressed together, heart to heart. "I'm not going anywhere, May. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me. Promise?" "I promise." He sealed it with a kiss, slow and deep and full of all the things they'd been through and all the things still to come. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The cabin needed extensive repairs and half the town showed up to help. May learned that frontier communities took care of their own, and she and Colt had proven themselves worth protecting. Men she'd never met showed up with lumber and tools. Women brought food and helped clean up the mess. Even the children pitched in, carrying small loads and running messages. Catherine became a true friend during those weeks, the kind of friend May hadn't had since before her mother died. They worked side by side, cooking for the volunteers and gossiping like schoolgirls. Catherine told stories about the other townspeople that made May laugh until her sides hurt, and May found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, hopes and fears, and dreams she'd thought died with James. "You're different now," Catherine observed one afternoon as they rolled out pie dough. "Lighter, somehow. Like you've let go of something heavy you'd been carrying." "I have," May admitted. "The fear, the guilt, the constant looking over my shoulder wondering when my past would catch up with me. It's gone now. Or at least it's not controlling me anymore." "That's what love does," Catherine said with a smile. "Real love, the good kind. It sets you free instead of trapping you." May thought about Colt, about the way he'd fought for her without asking for anything in return, about his patience and his kindness and his unwavering belief in her worth. "I didn't think this kind of love existed. I thought what I had with James, before it went bad, was as good as it got." "James was a mistake, not a template." Catherine crimped the edge of a pie with practiced efficiency. "And Colt is proof that good men do exist. They're rarer than hen's teeth sometimes, but they're out there. You just have to be brave enough to recognize them when they show up. The cabin repairs took 3 weeks. When they were finally done, the place looked better than it ever had. New windows with actual glass, a reinforced door with iron hinges, fresh chinking between the logs, and even a small addition that would serve as a proper bedroom. The bullet holes had been patched and painted over, erasing the visible scars even if the memories remained. May stood in the doorway on the day they moved back in, taking it all in. "It feels different," she said. "Still home, but new somehow." "New beginning," Colt said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "For both of us. For all of this." He rested his chin on top of her head. "Speaking of new beginnings, I've been thinking about something." "Dangerous activity," May teased. "Smartass." He turned her to face him, and May saw nervousness in his eyes. "We talked about getting married again, for real this time. I want to do it soon, May. I want to stand up in front of everyone and claim you as mine properly. I'm already yours." "I know, but I want the whole town to know it too. I want Judge Chambers to officiate and Catherine to cry and everyone to eat too much cake and dance until their feet hurt. I want to give you the wedding you deserved the first time, the one that should have been full of joy instead of desperation." He cupped her face gently. "Will you marry me, May? Again?" May's eyes burned with happy tears. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." They set the date for the first Saturday in June, when the prairie would be green and wildflowers would carpet the land in color. Catherine and the other women threw themselves into preparations with the kind of enthusiasm that left May simultaneously touched and overwhelmed. There would be a dress, a real wedding dress, not the worn traveling clothes she'd married James in or the simple calico she'd worn for her paper marriage to Colt. There would be flowers and music and more food than any gathering had a right to need. "They're going overboard," May told Colt one evening as they reviewed the ever-growing list of guests and preparations. "Half the territory is going to be here." "Let them." Colt pulled her onto his lap, something that had become habitual in the weeks since they'd moved back home. "You deserve to be celebrated. We both do. After everything we've been through, we've earned one perfect day." The night before the wedding, Catherine insisted on keeping May at her house. Something about tradition and not seeing the groom before the ceremony. May argued half-heartedly, but secretly enjoyed the ritual of it, the normalcy of preparing for a wedding like any other bride. They stayed up late, Catherine and several other women drinking tea and telling stories. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey, and the tea became significantly more interesting. May found herself laughing until she cried, surrounded by women who'd become friends, who'd stood by her when she'd needed it most. "To May," Catherine said, raising her spiked tea in a toast, "who proved that the best revenge is living well, loving fiercely, and occasionally shooting people who need shooting." "Hear, hear," the other women chorused, and May laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. But later, alone in the guest room, May stood at the window and looked out at the night sky. Tomorrow, she'd marry Colt. Really marry him this time, with witnesses and promises and a future stretching out before them like an open road. The thought filled her with joy, and still, a small flutter of fear. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Catherine. But it was Judge Chambers who entered, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Thought you might like some company," the older woman said. "Pre-wedding jitters are universal, even for second marriages." "I'm not nervous," May lied. Chambers smiled. "Of course not. That's why you're standing at the window at midnight, looking like you're contemplating escape routes." She sat in the chair by the door and patted the bed. "Sit. Talk to me." May sat, and after a moment the words came tumbling out. "What if I'm not good at this? Being a wife, I mean. A real wife, not just someone who cooks and cleans. What if I disappoint him? What if the fear comes back and I can't—" She stopped, unable to articulate the deeper worry. What if her body, so trained to associate intimacy with violence, couldn't unlearn 3 years of conditioning? "Those are reasonable fears," Chambers said gently. "But May, you've already proven you're good at being a wife. These past months, you and Colt have built a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. That's the foundation of any good marriage. The rest, the physical intimacy, the vulnerability, that will come when you're ready. and Colt will wait. He's proven that too. He's been so patient, more than I deserve. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. Chambers handed May the package. This is from me, a wedding gift of sorts. May unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. It's beautiful. I thought you might want to write your story, the real one, in your own words, not the version the warrant told, or the gossips, or even well-meaning people like me. Your story, May, what you survived and how you rebuilt yourself, for you or for your children someday, or just for the satisfaction of claiming your own narrative. Chambers stood and moved toward the door. You're a remarkable woman, May Merriman. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. After she left, May opened the journal and stared at the first blank page. Then, slowly, she picked up the pen and began to write. Not about James, or the violence, or the running. About the train platform where she'd met Colt. About the blizzard that had brought them together. About the moment she had realized she was falling in love with a broken man who'd helped her put her own pieces back together. She wrote until her hand cramped and the candle burned low. She wrote her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. As a woman who'd fought for her right to live and love and be free. When she finally put down the pen, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with dawn. It was her wedding day. The ceremony took place in the small church at the end of Main Street, packed to capacity with what seemed like half of Wyoming territory. May stood in the small room off the sanctuary, wearing a dress Catherine and the other women had sewn. Simple but beautiful. White cotton with delicate embroidery on the sleeves and hem. Catherine had woven wildflowers into May's hair, and May had never felt more beautiful in her life. "Ready?" Catherine asked, squeezing May's hand. May took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The doors opened, and May stepped into the sanctuary. Every head turned to look at her, and she felt a moment of panic. So many eyes, so much attention. Then she saw Colt standing at the altar, and everything else faded away. He was wearing his best suit, clearly uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but standing tall and proud. And when his eyes found hers, the smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Pure joy, unguarded and real. May walked down the aisle alone, not because she had no one to give her away, but because she'd chosen to walk it herself. She'd given herself away once before, handed over like property, and she'd sworn never again. This time, she came to Colt as an equal, choosing him just as he chose her. When she reached the altar, Colt took her hands, and May saw his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back. Judge Chambers stood before them, looking more relaxed than May had ever seen her. "Dearly beloved," she began, her voice carrying through the packed church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of May Carter and Colt Merriman. Though they are already bound by law, today they choose to bind themselves by love, the strongest bond of all." The ceremony was simple but perfect. They spoke traditional vows, but Colt had also written his own. "May," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you came into my life when I'd given up on living. You taught me that surviving isn't the same as being alive. You taught me to feel again, to hope again, to love again. I promised to cherish you, to protect you, to stand beside you through whatever storms come. I promised to be patient with your fears and gentle with your scars. And I promise that for the rest of my life, you will never have to face anything alone. This I swear, before God and everyone here." May's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back. "Colt," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "You saw me at my most broken and chose to stay anyway. You gave me sanctuary when I'd forgotten what safety felt like. You taught me that not all men are monsters, that love doesn't have to hurt, that I'm strong enough to fight for what I want. I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to stand beside you, to fight with you and for you, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. You are my home, Colt Merriman, and I choose you today and every day after." There wasn't a dry eye in the church when Judge Chambers pronounced them husband and wife. When Colt kissed May, it was tender and reverent, and the congregation erupted in applause that shook the rafters. The reception was held in the town square. tables groaning under the weight of food, a makeshift stage set up for music and dancing. May found herself pulled from group to group, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who'd become her community. Sheriff Hollis toasted them with genuine warmth, noting that he'd never been happier to see a case resolve with a wedding instead of a hanging. Even Samuel Morton from the general store managed something resembling good wishes, though his were tempered with remarks about getting her account settled. But the best moment came as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The music had shifted to something slow and sweet, and Colt pulled May onto the makeshift dance floor. "How are you holding up?" he asked as they swayed together, his arms around her waist, her hands on his shoulders. "Happy," May said, surprising herself with the simple truth of it. "I'm so happy I don't quite know what to do with it." "Get used to it," Colt said, pulling her closer. "Because I plan on making you this happy for the rest of our lives." "That's a bold promise." "I'm a bold man." He spun her gently, and May laughed. "Besides, you're stuck with me now. Married twice to the same man, there's no escaping." "Who says I want to escape?" May rose on her toes and kissed him, right there in front of everyone, not caring who saw. When she pulled back, Colt's eyes were dark with promise. "We should probably stay until the end of the party," he said, his voice rough. "It's polite." "Probably," May agreed. "But when has either of us cared about polite?" They slipped away as the party continued, riding back to the cabin together as stars began to appear overhead. The land stretched out around them, vast and beautiful, no longer frightening in its emptiness but full of possibility instead. At home, Colt carried May over the threshold, a tradition she'd missed the first time, when she'd walked into this cabin as a stranger escaping her past. This time, when her feet touched the floor, she was home in every sense of the word. What happened next was private, sacred, theirs alone. But it was gentle and slow, full of whispered promises and patience, and when May finally let herself be truly vulnerable with Colt, let him see and touch and love every scarred and broken part of her, she found that healing was possible. That intimacy didn't have to hurt, that her body could remember pleasure instead of pain. Afterwards, lying tangled together in their marriage bed, May traced idle patterns on Colt's chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For believing me. For fighting for me. For being patient. For loving me even when I couldn't love myself." She paused. "For giving me back my life." "You gave yourself back your life," Colt corrected gently. "I just helped. And May, you gave me mine back too. We saved each other." It was true, May realized. They'd both been broken when they met, her by violence, him by grief. And somehow, impossibly, they'd managed to piece each other back together into something stronger than either had been alone. The months that followed were the happiest of May's life. Summer came in full force, turning the prairie into a sea of green and gold. May's garden flourished, producing vegetables in abundance. The roses Colt had given her bloomed in riotous color, scenting the air with sweetness. They worked together from dawn to dusk, building their ranch into something profitable, something lasting. In August, Catherine Morrison had her third child, a girl, and asked May to be godmother. May held the tiny baby and felt something stir in her chest. Not quite longing, but possibility. Maybe someday? When the fear had receded a little more. When she felt ready to be responsible for another life. In September, word came that Jeb Hollister had been sentenced to 12 years in territorial prison for attempted murder. May received the news with quiet satisfaction, but found that she didn't hate him anymore. She'd wasted too much energy on hate already. Jeb was in the past, just like James, just like all the violence and fear that had defined so much of her life. One evening in early October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Colt said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "Should I be worried?" May teased. "Maybe." He pulled her closer against his side. "I want to expand the ranch. Buy more cattle, hire some help, really build something substantial. But that means I'll be busier, gone to town more often. And I wondered, would you want to take on more responsibility? Not just the house and garden, but actual ranch business, managing the books, dealing with buyers, that sort of thing." May sat up to look at him. "You'd trust me with that?" May, I trust you with everything I have. He touched her face gently. You're smart and capable, and you've got better head for numbers than I do. I think we could build something really special here. Together. Equal partners in every way. Equal partners. May let the words sink in, feeling their weight and their promise. James had treated her like property to be controlled. Colt was offering her a true partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Yes, she said. I'd like that very much. They shook on it like business partners, then sealed it with a kiss that was anything but businesslike. November brought the first real cold, a harbinger of the winter to come. But this year, May wasn't afraid of winter. She had warm clothes and a solid cabin and a man who loved her beside her. She had friends in town and a place in the community. She had purpose and hope and a future that was hers to shape. One morning, about a year after she'd first stepped off that train, May woke before dawn and slipped out of bed without waking Colt. She walked outside in her nightgown and bare feet, not caring about the cold, and stood in the yard looking at everything they'd built. The cabin, sturdy and weatherproof, smoke curling from its chimney. The barn, full of healthy animals. The garden, put to bed for winter but already planned for spring. The land stretching out in every direction, no longer empty but full of promise. And inside that cabin, sleeping peacefully, the man who'd given her all of this. Not through ownership or control, but through patience and love and unwavering faith in her strength. May had spent 3 years running from her past. She'd learned to fight, to shoot, to survive. She'd crossed half the country alone and terrified, certain she'd never find peace again. But standing here in the cold dawn air, looking at the life she'd built from nothing, May realized something profound. She'd stopped running. She'd found her place. She'd found her home. And more than that, she'd found herself. Not the girl she'd been before James, not the frightened woman who'd killed in self-defense, but someone new, someone stronger, someone who'd walk through fire and come out forged instead of broken. May? Colt's voice came from the doorway, rough with sleep and concern. What are you doing out here? You'll freeze. May turned to look at him, her husband, her partner, her home, and smiled. Just thinking. About what? About how I told you that if you touched me, I'd leave. She walked back toward him, not caring that her feet were numb with cold. Best bluff I ever made. Colt's arms came around her, pulling her close, sharing his warmth. Best bluff you ever made, he agreed, and kissed the top of her head. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who'd fought for their right to love and live and be free. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, turning the frost on the ground into diamonds. Inside, the fire was warm and breakfast needed making, and there were 1,000 small tasks that would fill their day. But for now, they just held each other and watched the dawn break over their land, their home, their future. The past was behind them, with all its pain and fear and violence. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of promise. And the present, this moment, this embrace, this quiet dawn, was everything. May Carter Merriman had stopped running. She'd found where she belonged, and she'd never been happier in her entire life. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang wild and free, carrying with it the promise of storms and sunshine, of hard winters and gentle springs, of all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Inside, there was warmth and love and the kind of peace that can only be earned through surviving the worst and choosing to believe in the best. And somewhere in the distance, just beginning to bloom despite the cold, a single rose opened its petals to greet the new day.